Okay, looks like we should be live, maybe. Could be.
Hopefully.
Let's see if this
Um,
actually lets me go live on whatever that thing is called. Well, for those who are joining us this morning, welcome to the Medieval Buzz with Rachel and Philip. I'm the Creative Contessa, and this is Philip from Irish Medieval History. And we are excited to bring to you some interesting conversations today, aren't we, Philip?
oh yeah, especially to do with Viking burials, crazy nuns that start up war bands, and a whole load of other mad stuff. I definitely have a whole load of mad news anyway, that's for sure.
Oh God.
You
Yeah, I
okay,
just had
Rachel?
the most terrible feedback because of Instagram. Like I was hearing us
Oh,
times
right.
five, just slightly offset from each other.
Oh,
That was that was that was alarming. Yeah, so we've got some
yeah, it's a great.
th- th- there's been some really interesting developments actually over the last week. Some I wasn't expecting, and some are actually slightly older news, but still a very very big interest. I think, especially as we get into the world of women's history, which we will be talking about today as
Yeah.
part of our thing. And we're adding to our medieval buzz segment. We're actually adding something new. We are
Mm.
adding a, what are we going to call this? A documentary review? How are we viewing this exactly?
I kind of just want to talk about YouTube in general. I do think it's important to talk about because we were going back and forth about this, and I seen a bit on YouTube, and there's always something happening, and it is our space, so we should be interacting with it and stuff. Is the fact that we do have various documentaries that are starting debates on YouTube. So I think it's important for us to interact with our space, which is the YouTube medieval world. So we will be doing, from now on, various segments to be doing stuff on YouTube and stuff and have conversations on what's going on YouTube, or even if it is controversial. And today it's going to be controversial, all right, for both sides because I has her interpretation at the same time as well. We're still going to be covering various other stuff such as archaeology, newest medieval books that are coming out. So don't panic or worry. We're not going to spend a full hour just talking about YouTube alone. We do still want to talk about the latest books that are coming out historically, what the academics are arguing about, and the new archaeological finds that are coming out. So don't panic if you think, oh, this is just going to be another YouTube drama station. It's not. We're still going to do our bits and bobs. Susan, thank you so much for that. It always means so much to myself and Rachel. As you know yourself, like sometimes myself and Rachel just kind of have a private talk to ourselves. We don't mean to do so, by the way, to have that full hour of us just
Yeah.
going at each other with no sound.
Yeah, that was the first look, turns out 10 minutes of my medieval cooking show was me just fighting to get the sound to actually come through. And because there was enough of a lag between the live chat and me, that by the time they tell me, "Oh yes, we can hear you," I've already moved on and clicked on
Mm,
something else. It was a disaster. Anyway, yeah.
mm,
So
mm.
let's go ahead and jump right in. Yeah, it was fantastic fun for the whole family, right?
Oh,
So
I.
first item we have today, hopefully will show itself. Yes,
Oh,
okay.
it's my book.
Book time. Yep.
Well, it's not my book per se. Obviously, this is a new book that's in November 13th. So only 58 days, so quite soon. For me, book alone really stood out. I was there looking at this cover and thinking, what the hell escalated for something like this to have happened, where you've got a bunch of women trying to defend a keep against an entire group of knights and mercenaries. And of course, even reading the description of the book in the back, it sounded like these are examples of 1,000 years of medieval history of things escalating completely out of hand. For example, this book covers various princesses and queens that are put into situations where they have to take on military campaigns. Even if you say, for example, have a woman who obviously marries into royal nobility, and from there her husband passes away, and it's going into warring campaign season. How does this woman react to the ever-changing world, where one day she's looking of her castle and keep, and the next thing she's defending her castle? The book escalates still further, where there's examples of nuns who they're put in a situation where they have to defend their abbey, raise a war band, and actually go off and fight another abbey, and even end up having various treaties against other monastic settlements of that region. So it definitely sounds like a book that's definitely very exciting, and it's something I'll definitely look forward to getting into, especially with the examples that the bibliography is giving at the back of the book and on various websites advertising the book. So even the promotion alone is definitely, intriguing me enough to want to go out there and pick up this book when it comes out November 13th.
Yeah, it looks really fascinating. It's interesting. One of my patrons, one of my channel members, Han, I don't know if she's out there, Twitchy Witch. She is, of course, very interested in medieval monasticism, how it was lived for both men and women. She's approaching it from the perspective of her own living history experience as a nun, or as a member of a monastic community, a female member of a monastic community. So this book will probably be very interesting to her. It looks like Clotilde, so that looks like first millennium, so 7th, 8th century, because it's those names look pretty first millennium to me. Princess Clotilde, yeah, and Basina. Do you know what era it is? It seems like Carolingian era, maybe.
Yeah, bang on. When I was actually looking up the examples in my own research, I did find that she was from the 10th century. No, granted, she does actually do a whole load with her life. Her own partner had passed away, which means that she had to herself take on the administration of that. And of course, with that, because it's the Carolingian era, she had to, being part of the campaigns and warfare. She's not the only woman who's put in this situation. What we find even in England is that we have either a father who passes away and leaves no sons, or we're in a situation where the husband passes away and the son isn't old enough. So it's the woman, either the noble or the queen, who has to take on the organizing of the campaign, and on top of that as well, at times leading the campaign as well, because you have to remember, these families didn't trust outsiders because they're constantly paranoid that someone else is going to come in and take everything away from them. Because I know a lot of people will turn around and say, yeah, but the Reginald will go in there and organize everything for her. That may not always be the case, especially when you're dealing with the likes of the 9th and 10th century, when it's warband on warband warfare. And some of these examples do actually come from the 9th and 10th century. For other examples, also, you can see the escalation from various areas nuns are active, where they're put into a situation where, for example, you'd have a warband or a bunch of brigades who would come over to a movement and start attacking them, harassing them, to a situation where they have to raise a warband to go and defend themselves, or they. So we can see this bibliography that's given out, which is quite interesting in it.
So then it's not just one particular example, it's multiple examples of as the title says, nuns at war. Is that correct, or is it just following the tale of one specific nun or set of nuns?
Well, I wouldn't say it's one particular story that involves nuns. There seems, from what I've seen at the back of the book, but you're bang on right. There are stories of situations where women have themselves, even get into an escalation situation where they have to raise war bands, so they defend themselves, put them situation where they can get a treaty of politics, which you can clearly see here. There's plenty of examples of them involved with the politics. It covers as 1,000 years of history. So there's plenty of examples for her to elaborate from. Very good book when it comes down to that kind of stuff, especially if you're interested in women's history, even more so women's history that escalate themselves and even push out to
yeah, it's very interesting how women have often been written out of the historical record for various reasons, and not all of them malignant or malicious, right? It's the men writing the history, so they don't care as much about what women are doing. Archives burn up, or there's a political reason why maybe it looks bad if the women are the one leading the charge, so to say. In this case, maybe not even metaphorically. So it is interesting how a lot of new research has been coming out over the last 20, 30 years, really, to actually give women a place in history and in place of importance, right? Maybe we can finally move away from the great man version of history into just history, right? And it's really fascinating how modern people, especially when they imagine a monastery, whether it's men or women in the monastery, they imagine prayer, they imagine peace and calm. They can't imagine warrior monks, let alone warrior nuns. But that was actually the reality of the medieval monastic settlement, especially earlier on when they're possibly fending off raiders, and brigands and bandits and Vikings and all of that. So yeah, you're right. Women in the monastic communities, they had to take up arms. It was either that or be overrun,
Yeah. Because you see the same examples seen in Ireland. I don't know if these examples will be in the book, but the same both in Scandinavia and in Ireland, where the men will go raiding on various other groups, or will have to go off and take part in campaigns of war. And then is that you have criminals, criminal war bands who will come around the area of these ring forts, if you take Ireland, for example, and which then leaves only the younger sons and the mother and her daughters to go up on top of the walls of the ring fort to try to defend the ring fort, spear and all, against these attackers who are trying to make their way over the wall. And you have to remember, these women have to fight to the death, because if these men get in, you know what they're going to do, and it's not going to be nice. So these women are quite literally fighting for their lives with their spear, trying to get these men off the wall,
Yeah,
perfectly.
So this is the book, everyone. Medieval Nuns at War: Rebellious, Resilient, and Rowdy Women. There's a lot of, and what have we, God, Phil, how often have you read recently in comments, and we'll talk about this in a little more detail, lady, in comments, especially on YouTube, but on social media in general, about revisionist history. Why are they just now coming out and saying that women were doing these things? Obviously, there's a hidden agenda here trying to rewrite history to make it more whatever. This really underscores how history, what we know about history, is constantly evolving. And you can't assume that work done by some historians in the 18th, 19th, and even 20th centuries is literally the end of history.
Yeah. I think the biggest problem is that people are coming at it from a very poor interpretation of what is the medieval period. Like, the medieval period is a kind of band on war. Early medieval period especially is a war band on war society. And so there is no nationalist at this from a very 19th and 20th century perspective to look after you. But if you off the war, minding the gender roles that are in society, in fact, to the gender roles of society, and try to understand it even more than what we did. But the problem is, from a 19th and 20th, we have a nationalist perspective, which means for us that society will come together. There is no one to protect the women. If you're off fighting war and you're the man of the house, that means there's no one to protect the farmstead settlement, the ring forts and stuff, which means it's going to be the younger sons and the mothers who are there to protect the ring fort. And what happens then is that, criminal war bands come along, and all they want to do is loot and take women, So these women straight away know what these men are up to. And so when they come over to try to forts, the women are there with their spears trying to defend themselves to the last moment, So this is kind of history that, another example, let's say you're the man of the house and you're dead. There's no life insurance. There's no form of insurance. There's no society to protect that woman.
Right.
What's she going to do? So and there is examples of women who are raised their son. And so once again, actually, there's even examples of those women out of true complete hate want to go and get vengeance, especially if they find out who man. But you remember the woman in Brittany during the 100 Years' War was killed, and she wanted vengeance. He was I think he was the Duke of Brittany, killed
the Duke
during
of
the 100
Brittany.
Years' War by the French, and she wanted vengeance. So she decided to take up arms as a pirate. Yeah, she's examples from the high note of that happening. And we got in Ireland as well, where if you have a blood feud where you have two men off, they both belong to families, there's nothing stopping a woman who is left, I'm going to get a spear and go kill that man. Now, that's where it gets complicated. People aren't turning around and saying, oh, well, maybe she'll get successful. Maybe she doesn't have the skill. That's where it gets interesting. And it's definitely in the realm of possibility when there is no society that may not be, there is society there to protect her. We had in the 19th and 20th century, there's no roof with any form of life insurance or anything like that.
There's no central government or anything like that. Yeah. There's no services.
Yeah. So when I was looking at the comment section, I did find it very interesting that people were looking at it from the 19th and 20th. Don't get me wrong. There is examples we'll be talking about later where I was turning around and saying, I don't fully agree with the argument.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the person giving the example had read the literature where I could tell straight away the comment section had looked at it from a more 19th and 20th nationalist perspective rather than the perspective of the medieval era.
Right, yeah. So we've got some good questions here. Could it be that the abbesses of these abbeys would have come from local influential families and clans that gave them some clout to lead the others? Absolutely. Abbesses were nearly always from the nobility. It wasn't some serf who found her way somehow into the monastic community and rose to the rank of abbess. Most abbesses were noble women. And that continues on into the 18th century easily. So yeah, they would have had clout. They would have also had nice clothes. They would have had nice lodgings in the abbey. Abbesses absolutely would have had clout. And it's even, depending on the century, it's possible that they may have had some training, especially first millennium, women are more likely to have some martial experience than in the, later Middle Ages. Yeah, I'm assuming probably it's the same thing in Ireland, that it's women of the upper, obviously you don't have quite the same structure in Ireland, with not feudalism not quite being the same thing, but it's probably the same in Ireland, right? That it's the daughters of high-ranking families who end up taking these positions of power.
It's when it comes down to martial art training, because it's slightly cut off there. I just heard about martial art training, but when it comes down to martial art training, it's very strange because of the fact that in the Ulster cycles we have so many examples of women training cattle raiders and various other men of nobility and stuff. So it's very, very, very questionable. Why do we have trainers who are females? There's quite literally a law that prevents women from going onto the battlefield, which then questions, okay, so why is there like a solid law in the 8th century called the Law of the Innocents, which prevents, first off, it prevents meant to prevent like brigand. It doesn't really ultimately examples of brigands attacking women and children. It's meant to prevent, the law of the innocents is meant to prevent war bands from attacking women, children, and the clergy. But it's interesting to note with the wording that it's meant to prevent women from going to the battlefields and stuff. There you have a quite literally an example of a law that's meant to stop women from going into the battlefields and fighting with the men and stuff. So it's really a question of like, why is that law there, you know? So that's very interesting that in the Ulster cycles of Irish literature, we do have women training cattle raiders on how to do martial arts. And on top of that as well, we have the laws of the innocents, which is meant to be there to prevent women from taking part in battles. We also have examples in Irish history as well of men, just playing around with their partners and stuff. If you've ever done if you've ever dated someone that does boxing or any form of martial arts and stuff, you know full hand that they're more than keen to teach their partners martial arts. Like, for example, I'm always showing my wife kickboxing techniques and stuff. Even if your partner isn't, the master of kickboxing and stuff, it's still something they play around and do. And girlfriend, sometimes it depends if it's annoying or not, but a lot of them love messing around and learning those bits and bobs of kickboxing and wrestling and stuff. And so I could easily imagine if the partner has been a cattle raider for a good few years, or has been a Clee area, a member of the King's War Band and stuff, and he has that martial art background, teaching their partner those martial arts and stuff. Could easily imagine it, especially if they know that their partner could be in danger when they're off with the war band, and suddenly a bunch of brigands appear to defend herself, that he'd feel more comfortable if she knew how to use it. I think it's a bit of common sense, in my opinion.
Yeah, for certain. And not only would he feel more comfortable, but it's more likely he's going to come home to a home that's still his.
Yes. But it's interesting because you see the exact same examples in Japan. In Japan, there's actually loads of examples of samurai teaching their wives how to defend themselves. And on top of that as well, have camp followers in the background. The samurai had fallen on the battlefield. They themselves would go forward to, basically defend themselves in a formation and stuff. So we have examples of both on the battlefield, where if the samurai had fallen, these women would then defend themselves in battle formation, and on top of that as well, even in their homes and stuff, when the men went off to war, if a bunch of criminals had come by, I'm just branding them as criminals, they weren't really called criminals at the time, but we know what their intentions was to come in, take the woman, or steal her stuff, that she would have the ability to defend herself, because the samurai himself would have spent those hours in the evening messing around with his wife, teaching her how to use a spear and stuff. But for me, I just feel like it's common sense, especially if you know martial artists and what they're like. They love spending hours with their girlfriend or partner, teaching them these martial arts skills and drills. I just think it's common sense, like.
Yeah, I agree. I think it yeah. But what's interesting is that there's evidence that by the later Middle Ages, anyway, by the 15th century, for instance, that's no longer really happening very much. And that's because, for instance, there's many cases of women defending the castle or the city, but when the chroniclers talk about them defending it, they talk about them using everything under the sun except for what we might consider proper weapons. I mean, literally throwing pots and kitchen implements down, boiling oil down the sides of the castle. They're not using bows and weapons that require skill and training. They're using whatever they can get their hands on. Now, again, the chroniclers who chronicle this, maybe they didn't want to present women in that kind of martial light, because there was definitely the idea by the 15th century of that being unnatural, right? You have she-wolves are unnatural. She-wolves do things like take over the kingdom and rule in place of their son. She-wolves do things like take up arms. So it could be that the chroniclers didn't want to present the women of their town in that light. So this also underscores why you can't necessarily trust what chronicles say, or you shouldn't trust what chronicles say, 100%.
Oh yeah, 100%. It is fascinating. All right, I had a thought frame there and it just popped out of my head. Oh yes, because you see the exact same examples as well in the High Middle Ages. A lot of Normans had married Irish nobility, Irish women, which is it's kind of a funny mix because all the Gaelic men are like pushed up into the mountains and stuff, and we treat that as like that's Gaelic societies over there, and the English are living in these occupied spaces. But in reality, when dealing with the southeast of Ireland during the Norman occupation of Ireland, it's a case of actually they married local Gaelic women, which is very, very interesting in itself. And these Norman knights would then go back to, this is where it gets actually funny. I say Norman knights, and at the time they're kind of referred to as the Knights of Kilkenny or the Knights of Waterford or the Knights of Wexford. And I have to highlight that because they go back to France in 1220 to actually fight the Normans, and that's why that whole term is very controversial right now. Normans going off to Normandy to fight the actual Normans. That's weird, especially if you're talking to historians in France and England. It's like, okay, why can't you just call them Irish Knights or something? And even for the Irish, it's still but they're the invaders. 800 years of British occupation and stuff. So the term Irish Knight or Anglo-Irish Knight is, very, very touchy-feely with the Irish because they only stopped fighting against the English in 1998. So it's understandable that the term Anglo-Irish or any of these terms is very touchy-feely with a lot of people. But regardless, my point being is that you'd have the men of, the Knights of Kilkenny, the Knights of Waterford, the Knights of Wexford, the Knights of Dublin, rising up and then going off to France to go and fight the Knights of Normandy. And while they're away, best example being William Marshall, his wife is in charge of all the administration to do with Kilkenny Castle. And guess what? Kilkenny Castle gets under attack, and she's the one leading the siege with her few men. Because, like, what gives these castles a huge advantage is you only need about 5, 6, 7 knights inside there, or men inside there to man the castle.
I was about to say, castles are actually, well-designed castles are actually relatively easy to defend.
Yeah, but at the same time, as you point out there, you find these princesses, these noble women, are there hanging off the side of the wall, trying to get these ladders down. That's why these situations happen because there's only so few. Like sometimes, I think in England, you could probably find examples of only 4 men running around the tower of the castle trying to get these ladders down, trying to get the boiling water over and stuff. And so it's no shock that you have women as well going up onto the tower, trying to get the boiling water over the wall, trying to get, kick off the ladders and stuff. So to me, it's no surprise, to be honest with you.
Yeah, no, it's not at all. So let's see. We had some more good questions here in the comments. Did medieval rulers differ from region to region in Ireland and the way that they ruled? Oh, which period? Which century?
Yeah,
which
that gets very, very complicated because you do have the early medieval period, but according to the Seanachus Mór, it literally says the men of Ireland have kind of promised to kind of stay under the Seanachus law. But then, did they actually per region to region, for example, like is the law completely different in the Ianail territory in a good chunk of the majority of the island? Is that the same Seanachus Mór or same Brehon laws in that territory? Or is it different in the Oireachta territories in the south of Ireland? And is it different again in the west of Ireland? And these are the major over-kings of Ireland. So that one's quite difficult. And then, of course, you've got the High Middle Ages, where you have a massive difference between the rulers in the O'Neill territory and the O'Connor territory. And then you have a good chunk of it that's ruled by the Lordship of Ireland, which is sort of in this kind of bastard kind of feudalist ruling. So, the High Middle Ages, there's definitely massive differences between the Gaelic areas and the areas that are under the Lordship of Ireland. And then when you go into the late medieval period, then it truly is a free for all between the different areas and stuff. There's definitely differences between the territories ruled by the Fitzgeralds and the Butlers compared to, once again, the O'Neill territories and the O'Connor territories. So yeah, as Rachel said there, depends on the era. Is there massive differences there? Just getting back to himself there, I have one more question before going 15 minutes. What were the effects of the Viking? I could write a book on the effects of the Viking raids. If you go into my shorts, I'm actually just starting to get into. I'm doing shorts every day, pretty much, on the Kings of Ireland, and I literally just started the Kings of Ireland. So jump onto my page on Irish medieval history and go into my shorts, and I'm literally just starting the Viking Age in Ireland, or just look at my previous videos. I have covered a good few videos on the effects on the Vikings in Ireland, so pop them there, because there's literally endless amount of books right now. I would definitely check out Claire Downham's book on Vikings of Britain and Ireland. Was it the Emer dynasty? So Claire Downham would definitely be someone I'd look into, and look into her books and stuff on the Emer dynasty in Ireland and Britain. That definitely would be a spot. So you're asking questions are literally, I could write books on, to be quite honest with you. Like,
oh goodness, yeah, it's I love it when people ask us these questions. Is in the entire Middle Ages did such and such happen, or was such and such a thing, and it's like, oh, it's 1,000 years.
Yeah, I get paid to answer these questions, so it's like, well,
Yeah.
I do have a Patreon.
yeah. Okay. So yeah, medieval nuns at war, definitely get it, and expand your understanding of women's roles in society. And there was an earlier question from Blake of whether this was a women's history channel or a medieval Irish history channel. This is a medieval history news segment. This is neither Irish history nor women's history. It's all the medieval history. Ireland is part of medieval history, but so are women. So
I do apologize that women don't exist in Ireland. They seem to be, and they seem to be imported around the 19th century. But I like talking about women. I know people definitely frown upon men getting into relationships with women and stuff. I definitely think that's frowned upon these days. But I'm sad to say I do get into relationships with women. I do like talking about women. And I know they're not immigrated into Ireland until the 19th century, but
totally, all men all the time, all men all the time, and they reproduce by mitosis. They just split, right? they just fission, and there's a new human.
Where's that question? Jesus Christ! What a question to bloody ask.
Yeah, it's okay.
What? Are women not part of Irish history? Like, Isabel de Clare, does she not exist? Does Queen Maeve not exist? Like, what the fuck?
And all the nuns.
Like, I don't know. Maybe they don't exist in the Irish halls. I'm sorry, did you not? Where were you when the Tom Book Cooley was written? Like, Queen Maeve was running around the Great Hall screaming and shouting 24/7. Like, whoa.
Yeah. Okay, next in our medieval news update. Oh, this is an interesting one.
Oh, wow.
Okay, yeah, medieval women's spy network. So a fantastic news. So this what you all are looking at is actually a 17th century map of the city of Ypres in Flanders. It is 17th century, but it's pretty much basically the same. It is the same layout, the same way it looked in terms of shape in the 15th century. And the reason we are talking about this now is because a new book has just come, or a new research paper has just come out that has revealed women's very active roles in a very active and well-coordinated spy network in Burgundy from 1480 to 1489. And basically these researchers actually went into the town archives in Ypres, in Ghent, and in Bruges, and they found records of women being paid to carry messages, to spy in enemy camps in enemy cities, and going great distances unaccompanied, or sometimes with a fellow woman, but almost never accompanied by a man, to relay these messages from people on the one side of this war. So what many people don't realize is that the Duchy of Burgundy basically ends because Mary of Burgundy becomes the heiress of Burgundy after Charles the Bold stupidly dies in a battle that he didn't need to die in. It wasn't even a real battle. His camp was overrun. Anyway, Charles the Rash for the win. So Mary of Burgundy inherits, and she marries Maximilian, the Archduke of Austria, who would soon become the king of the Romans. But Mary unfortunately dies in a riding accident in 1482.
Yeah.
Now the Burgundian cities support her. They like her. She's their princess, right? They have a connection to her. She was raised in all of these cities. She had palaces in all these cities. So they watched her grow up from this adorable little girl into a beautiful young woman, and she was a good ruler. They liked her. They supported her. They didn't support her husband though, because he was a damned foreigner.
Yeah.
And their son, they had a son, Charles V. Now, or the man who would become Charles V in Spain, rather, right? So Philip the Fair. They had a son, and Charles is the grandson, Philip the Fair. And so Philip is technically the heir, right? Because he's her son, but he's a child. So Maximilian declares that he shall be the regent. And the town council is like, we will be the regent. You have no say in this. And so it starts a civil war. And so on the one side, you have the town councils who want to establish their independence from Maximilian. And then on the other side, you have Maximilian. And, the son, Philip the Fair, who's like, let me see, at this point, he's like, I don't know, 6, 7, maybe, not very old. And so he's not really much of a player in all this. It really is his father, who is literally referred to in one of the expense accounts, actually says, we are sending this woman to go and ascertain the situation of the king of the Romans. So they openly acknowledge that they are paying a woman to go and spy on Maximilian in his own damned camp. So, this basically, this conflict lasts for about a year. They don't win, by the way. But they try. And these women are essential in gathering intelligence, in relaying messages between the leaders in the various cities. They're going out to this place where a secret council is meeting of the leaders of the big 3 cities. And they're getting paid to do it repeatedly again and again and again. And the reason that they are hired and not men, like they find almost no evidence of men being used for this purpose. Is because, can you guess why you would choose women to do this instead of men in the 15th century?
Big time. Like one of the best examples, and I know it's fantasy, and I know, what was it called, the last few seasons of it was absolutely diabolical, but one of the best, he still based it off the Wars of the Roses, okay, and that's why I think it's one of the best examples, is actually Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones had so many female spies that were able to get into the nitty-gritty, gather up all that information for various groups, or even to sell that information onwards. It's just the fact that women are able to get into those nitty-gritty areas, from kitchens to various establishments. Women are all over, the camp followers, as they're referred to, the women who basically go around doing all the administration and the bits and bobs while men are on the battlefield and stuff, and even look after the men, wink, wink, in the evenings and stuff when they're come back in, for a price, of course. So it's way easier to get women in there, especially when men are in, if they're on the battlefield, for example, they're in vulnerable mental states and they need to open up. Guess what? A camp follower always has an ear there to listen and gather up all this information. And this isn't unique to the late medieval period. This is a technique that ends up dominating again and again and again, as you have women, men want to open up, especially if there's a sudden traumatic event that happens to them, and you always have that ear to listen to. So that would be my interpretation of why you need to send out women again and again and again, to gather up all this information as quick as, and come back to them again. So that's my interpretation anyway.
Yeah, so it's it's actually not just that, it's that these men were too stupid to think that the women would actually be playing an important role. So literally women go unnoticed. And this is underscored by the fact that in 1403, there's an interesting incident of piracy happening in the Channel. An English ship is captured by Flemish pirates. And aboard this ship are 3 English noblewomen. And the record, the chronicle actually observes, the captain actually, the corsair captain, captures the women, but he treats them well because he notices they're noble. He interviews them and finds out their identities. We actually know their names. And he observes that they're carrying a packet of documents that are sealed. But he leaves them alone because he literally says they're just women. We have nothing to worry about, but for these women. But this is all part of the 100 Years' War. And so these women are taken into captivity in France. I forget which city. It was a city that was in French control. They're kept in an inn. They're noble women, so they're not, tossed in a jail. They're kept properly. They're not assaulted in any way. And they write to the French king, to Charles VI, and they say, "Hey, what should we do with these women?" And he writes back and says, "Because they're just women, you should just let them go about their business." So literally, that is why these women get recruited to be the spy network, because apparently the men in these cities recognized that especially noblemen, knights would not, and this could actually reflect a class difference, right? The handcraft class, the merchant class maybe is more ready to acknowledge the work of women because women are still working. Yeah, seriously, right? They're running tailor shops, they're running breweries, they're taking over their husbands' businesses when their husbands die. So they're actually acknowledging that women do things, and they do real things, and they produce real products. So we won't undervalue them. Meanwhile, there could be this kind of, the whole idea of the code of chivalry amongst the very, the nobility, which was really only ever acknowledged at that level, made them view women as being, they're just doing women's stuff. So we'll just let them go about their business, right? This could actually be a difference in class. But either way, yeah, it's the women literally were able to pass unnoticed in and out of camps, and no one bothered to stop them and say, "Why are you here? What are you looking for? Why is it you're sitting right outside of the King of the Romans pavilion and just listening?"
That is wild to me. The fact that he's not adapting to the changing of warfare and stuff, and he's just like, "Oh well, they're just women." Maybe that's why they were losing.
Yeah, right.
yeah. That you have other people who are adjusting to what's going on. For example, what was it called? The Italians, like the Medici and stuff, that had absolutely no problems using massive amount of trade, spy networks and stuff. Not even just to gather up information for warring campaigns, but even for their banking and stuff, to know what their their audience needed financially and stuff. So for the likes of Medici, for example, to have those to have control of certain establishments, wink wink, so they can gather up that information and stuff, is that's at the peak of warfare in Italy. It's kind of expected in Italy, from my understanding. You could easily correct me with that one, Rachel. But it's just strange that the French don't kind of adapt to this new form of warfare of using women to get out there, gather the information that they need and bring it back. Because if noble women are doing it, that means you have the entirety of that, a good chunk of those camp followers that are probably doing even more details of the information that's needed. So, that it does explain why the French were just losing a whole load of wars, to be quite honest with you, in my opinion.
Well, in fairness, so thinking about this, it's Flanders. This is a civil war at this point. So this is Flanders versus Flanders. Technically, this is Flanders versus Burgundy, right? This is Flanders versus Maximilian. So that's not the French. That's Maximilian and his people, many of whom are, who counts as French in the end of the 15th century, right? Is it French speakers? Because there's a lot of Flems who speak French.
That's very true.
There's, is it, and the Burgundians, they're all Valois, like the family, they're French, they're Valois, right? They're French speakers. So it's kind of, I would hesitate to use the word French like that unless you're really talking about the Kingdom of France. And in this particular war, it's not. The Kingdom of France is getting involved only so far as they want to take over territories, but they're not part of this civil war thing. Probably, I think no doubt the French king was hoping to oust Maximilian altogether and then take over the Low Countries for himself. So he was probably supporting Ghent and Ypres and Bruges in the hopes that after Maximilian's gone, then he can just, sweep in and capture all those super rich ports. But as such, it's at least from the 1488 to 89 period, it isn't a French thing. It's not the French ignorance that's letting the women do all these things. But you brought up a really good point, or you mentioned camp followers, and I just want to emphasize for everyone, camp follower is absolutely not a synonym for prostitute. It is not. It is not. It is not. There were many camp followers who didn't prostitute themselves, part-time or full-time. Camp followers could include laundresses. They could include nurses in the 15th century. They could include seamstresses because, how many of my fellow reenactors out there have had to sew up their men's arming garments? I have. So it wasn't just camp followers were literally just the women who followed the army, the armed forces, however you want to refer to them back then, the men at arms, the units, in order to make a living, to have and it was ironically a way for women to actually have freedom, because they were then for masters of themselves, right? They were earning their own money. They were doing their own thing. No one was telling them what to do beyond the usual, I need you to fix this. Could you please wash my bloody shirt? So yeah, camp follower, not a synonym for prostitute. Not all camp followers were prostitute. And in fact, camp followers apparently throughout the Middle Ages and all the way up until the 18th century were an essential part of the spoilage operations of battles, because they would go and help harvest the spoils from the bodies of the fallen. So yeah, they would actually go and get, and this is what the women who followed the Landsknecht around also, like they were in it for the riches. They were in it to go in and loot themselves some dead enemies and sell the armor and whatever they found and make a profit from it. So camp followers also did a lot of that as well. So they were not. It wasn't quite like that. It wasn't like they all had a tent that they spent every night in with some random man at arms. They didn't. So just keep that in mind. Of course there were women who absolutely made some extra money, at least, laundresses too. That's why laundress became a synonym for prostitute, unfortunately, but it's not necessarily the case.
But these are the conversations that we're looking to have, Rachel, the deeper conversations, because if we just keep looking at military forces from the perspective of these are just a bunch of, I just had the image of the Spartans in my brain, because that's the thing, is that like these men all have, especially with the sudden trauma that's going on, all the administration that's going on and stuff. It's like people expect these military forces to be a group of Spartans walking around the place looking after their own needs and stuff. Instead, you have entire camp followers behind them, not just women, by the way. You also have blacksmiths, you also have carpenters. So, and these are the conversations we need to be having and elaborating on, not just in Ireland, but obviously in Europe and as well, with the likes of the Landsknecht and stuff, because we're so kind of hemmed in with this idea of just a bunch of men roaming around the place, when that's not the case. You have a whole group of camp followers. And then the question is, okay, so what's day-to-day life like for these camp followers when they're going from settlement to settlement with their men folk? What's going on here? What are they doing and stuff?
Yeah, it's definitely, I definitely, the way I'm understanding, the more I'm reading about recent research, it's definitely refashioning my, what I was taught back in school a million years ago. And of course, Hollywood doesn't help, as always. TV shows don't always help. They exacerbate a lot of these myths, and so it can be even harder to fight them. But I think what's the most important thing is that everyone needs to just understand that history can evolve, our understanding of history can evolve, and accept that. Don't fight it. I mean, obviously, critical thinking, check the evidence. Don't just accept things. Don't even accept what I'm saying. Go and read the research paper, right? But that we at least be open-minded to accept that our previous understanding of history is either incomplete or even inaccurate.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe it's just the fact we just have such a 19th, 20th, even 21st century idea of what a military force looks like. We have such a modern idea about it. But like, I don't know. It's funny, like, because of the fact that we need to actually strip down and say, okay, actually, do I actually know what a military force looks like during the medieval period? Because the thing is, when you put out the whole thing of camp followers and stuff, people are like, huh? What's a camp follower? Like, what is that? Because it's a term we barely ever use, because
Right.
we talk at military forces like they're just one big sledgehammer going in there. Like, don't get me wrong, when you're doing documentaries, military style documentaries and stuff, you do take it from it's easier to take it from the point of the 20th century, where you have these, blocks, and this represents Gallo Glass. The Gallo Glass go in, they're sieging this castle, they siege it for multiple days, and then they go off and they attack this other block that represents the current, cattle raiders and stuff. It's easier to simplify warfare from the perspective of the 20th century. But then the problem is with that is that you get this idea then of just a group of men roaming around the place, no camp followers, no administration. And, then you've got questions of, okay, so how are these people feeding themselves? How are their clothing getting clean so they're not dying of various plagues? These questions need to be then asked when you then get into the finer details. And then magically the camp followers just appeared, when we don't simplify things any longer,
Right. Yeah. It's these sorts of details. Your average modern person imagines a medieval army, and again, 1,000 years of history. But anyway, they imagine that it's just a bunch of knights running around killing people, right? Like they don't even, and maybe not even riding around killing people. So they don't even, like, no one understands just how organized these things were. How in Burgundy, for instance, they had amazing ordinances, like super detailed ordinances that governed how the units were structured, how they were equipped, their hierarchy, they actually had a complete unit breakdown, very, very similar to a modern armies do. So yeah, the Middle Ages is not this disorganized period of chaos that everyone thinks it is. And women are part of that organization for certain. But what was interesting to me is what I read is that stopped basically with the real inception of the modern army. So by which I mean, like, in the 19th century, you still had some camp followers, but apparently they weren't spoiling the enemies anymore, at least not in Europe.
Yeah, I do know in Ireland, because if you go over to one of the best examples of that actually is in, oh my God, Kinsale, that's the one. We can actually watch and monitor the development of the Irish military force from the last Gaelic army around 1603. We can actually see the development of them going into the British military, and then from evolving into the British military, and then evolving all the way into the First World War. And in that, you can actually see the relationship of these poor camp follower women who literally follow these men around the place, and then they build these barracks, and they're trying to sneak their women into the barracks with them, and they're trying to put them in like lockers and these, by the way, it's not just these poor women alone, it's also their poor children, because they have children with them as well, and they're trying to hide them in locker rooms, and they're trying to hide them in boxes and stuff. And eventually what happens, they never get rid of this, by the way. This behavior continues all the way up to leading into the First World War.
Fantastic.
And so this behavior continues all the way to World War I, until eventually they just start building housing to keep these families in. But for so long, like, it becomes this kind of speak no about this, like, don't talk about this. This is kind of a thing that happens where they're constantly trying to find ways to keep these women outside of the barracks, but yet they find ways to get into the barracks with the men, and these poor women have to share and do all their the stuff that women have to do while sharing it with multiple in a room full of multiple men. So it's like, geez, when you're hearing about the stories that happen in Kinsale Fort and stuff, you're like, oh my God, like,
I mean,
wild.
It's the same thing. The same thing happened in the U.S., right? With our military. I'm confident it's probably true across all of the West, and that eventually all of the various armed forces just said, okay, well, clearly we need to make housing, and
like
we need
common sense,
right? Clearly, clearly, the way the modern army is now structured, we can't expect the soldiers to live completely separated from their families for the entire duration of their term of service. This is because, back in the Middle Ages, there was a season, like you went and you fought for the season and then you came home again. You didn't live on a military base. So yeah, it's a very different, probably a classic case of the system adapting too slowly to the changing circumstances.
Yeah,
Probably.
yeah. Oh, I definitely believe in that one. Just jumping back over to the comment section there. Sorry for being so rude with you guys. But I have one here saying about Irish unity to fight off the enemies. Oh, this is one I always hate answering because I always get this idea that you have this image of these 150 tribes of people who are running around naked and stuff, and that's not the case. Ireland, don't get me wrong, depending on the era that you're in, Ireland obviously has different forms of evolution going on, but it's no different to what's going on in Europe. For example, if you're talking about the early medieval period with the coming of the Vikings, because you're highlighting the Vikings a whole load, the Emer existed. They didn't you really want to look into. There's actually an entire list you can look up on Wikipedia. Wikipedia is not perfect, and the problem is as well is it kind of gives a modern interpretation of the High Kingship, but it gives you a full list that you can look up to each king of Ireland. Now, the thing about the early medieval period, not just in Ireland, but throughout all of Europe, is you're dealing with basically the man with the biggest stick. You're dealing with war bands that just dominate. And then the leader of that war band, he is, the high king of that area. So this whole idea of high kingship just doesn't exist in Ireland. It also exists in England and Europe and so on and so forth. Like you get the same thing with King Ethelstan, for example. Yeah. When he becomes king, the English sort of advertise him as a centralized king. He wasn't a centralized king. He was a decentralized king, just like the high kings were in Ireland. In fact, the title High King is chucked around instead of centralized, this whole idea of centralized king. So what a centralized king is basically, you've got your king at the top, and then you've got your knights, and then you've got your peasants. But the reality is that whole idea of centralization doesn't become dominant until the 19th century. Even in England, that has the Domesday Book. In fact, people who specialize in the Domesday Book highlight the fact that the Domesday Book was only kept, was only recorded 1 year, and then it was abandoned after that. They stopped doing it because it took up too many resources. It was easier just to rock up, collect a tribute, and then go off again. So the whole idea of centralization doesn't come in. Now, if you're looking for any form of unification, it's already there in Ireland with the Enel when the Vikings arrive. The thing is, when the Vikings arrive, Ireland is in a civil war between Iona and Armagh, but then you'd have to look into the complications of that and why there's a civil war happening in Ireland at the time. Once again, way into a big, massive subject in itself. Then we pop over to Joan of Arc, highlighting the fact that which Volt makes a very, very, very good point, is the fact that Joan of Arc was not keen with the camp followers in the slightest, constantly chasing them away. I could imagine that. Myself and Rachel have both done our time with the military, and we could easily imagine why Joan of Arc would have frowned upon women within the military, the area of the military force and stuff, especially in the late medieval period, given, the mad stuff that they were getting up to and that. But at the same time, you have to remember, these people were looking to relax. They spent hours, banging away, doing these jobs as quick as they could with a whole load of stress on top of them. So in the evening and stuff, when they're drinking their alcohol and stuff next to the fire and stuff, you can imagine them getting up to all kinds of stuff in the evening and that. So at the same time, I could imagine why Joan of Arc was, insanely anti-camp followers,
Well, again, I think I haven't heard that, and I honestly would question the veracity of that report. Not you, Volt. I'm not questioning you. I mean the historical report, because we don't actually have much primary source information about Joan of Arc that's contemporary to her. A lot of the things that are written about her, even in the 15th century, post-date her. And so, I would question whether she actually did or not. I'm not saying she didn't. I haven't heard that. I would be interested to know the source for that. But again, this also comes back to translation. What does camp follower mean? Camp follower in now English encompasses a whole lot of people. So I'm confident she wasn't chasing away the laundresses, right? Because she would also want her undergarments to be laundered. So yeah, is camp follower, was that being used by some 19th century translator, for instance, as a euphemism for prostitute? In which case, yeah, I could absolutely see Joan of Arc chasing away prostitutes because she had a very pious approach to life. And I could see how she would view that as a not only morally reprehensible, but possibly on a practical level, not a great thing for these soldiers to be distracted by such, worldly desires. And she might have also been thinking about the spread of sexually transmitted diseases, honestly.
Yeah,
in
because
the
that
camp.
is the era when it kicks off, isn't it?
Right. I mean, so she's, there's all kinds of reasons that it might be, but I hesitate. I really don't like using this word camp follower as a synonym for prostitute because it's not.
Yeah.
Some camp followers it's a category, right?
Yeah.
You have camp followers, and these are the people who literally follow the army, all of them.
Yeah.
All of them. And then under the heading of camp follower, sorry, my laptop just decided it was hungry. Under the heading of camp follower, we therefore also have prostitute.
Yeah.
So yeah, Vault, I would be interested to know the source for that claim that she was chasing away camp followers. That would be very interesting to me.
Because the thing is, if you look into Irish warfare, and I'm assuming it's the exact same thing in Europe as well, is during the battle when they're doing their rotations and stuff, their weapons are being damaged and destroyed. So they need to rotate their way out of the battle and then go back into the camp area again. And they need to talk to the camp follower, which is the blacksmith and the carpenters who are there on the site to as quick as they can, fix these little bits and bobs if they don't have a replacement, or even if the carpenter or blacksmith has brought, which, doesn't surprise me, you're in a battle, he's going to quickly, either sell or do something to give you a spear to get out there again, so it wouldn't surprise me if these camp followers would have extra spears, extra bits and bobs they need for the emergency that's happening in front of them, which is the battle, so yeah, you're perfectly right. You're not just dealing with how do I word this now, with women who are looking after those certain needs. You also have so many other people that are involved with the administration of the camp, including men as well.
Right. And I think honestly the better word is sex worker. Prostitute has a lot of baggage. So yeah, sex workers. Let's call them what they were.
Because of the algorithm. You need to I'll stay native the night for the time being.
But I mean, Dr. Yanaga has like an entire series on it. I think it's okay. I think using the proper terms is okay. It's if we started dropping other words, maybe. Yeah. So there's another good question here, and actually one that could be a good segue. Were some women considered healers, and did that sometimes get misinterpreted as witchcraft? So I don't have. Okay, so when and where, right? Again, Middle Ages is 1,000 years of history, and it's a whole continent, and so your mileage is going to vary. I will say that in 15th century France, England, Burgundy, and Italy, there are certainly women who, healers is almost too new agey. I don't like that word, but who did practice medical care. All women did. Noble women had a book of secrets that had a whole host of medicinal remedies in them. So yes, absolutely, women practiced first aid medical care and also follow-up treatments, if someone in the household was injured and they had to provide long-term care. To be considered a healer, if you're talking about on the level of physician, there were female physicians in the Middle Ages, absolutely, in various parts of Europe, Spain especially, what is now Spain, but wouldn't have been Spain then. But yeah, some of the Spanish kingdoms, in parts of Italy, yeah, there were female physicians, absolutely. And they would not have, witchcraft.
Yeah, it's funny one because you do have a play on words with Scandinavia. and Old Irish going between healer. Because when you asked that question, I was like, well, you're going to provoke the English historians and stuff, because they were like, there's no witchcraft or what was it? There's no trials of witchcraft until the 15th. Oh, sorry, until the 16th. No, sorry, the 17th century and stuff. You'll trigger all those historians, because lately they've been running around pretending there's no history outside of England and France. And it's like, actually, witchcraft, the play on words between Scandinavian Norse and Irish when it comes down to the words to do with witchcraft and healers and stuff is kind of a funny one, because you do have herbs and kind of the unnatural, the whole argument between natural Christian ideas, because magic was sort of a part of the Christian world. If you went off and you did a pray to God, that was considered kind of natural magic. So when it comes down to the
divine magic,
when it comes down to the usage of words between Irish and I don't. You see, the reason why this is even more complicated to explain is because language isn't actually my how we say specialty. That's the word. So I wouldn't be the best one at it, because while you said that, you've got that word that comes into Irish, which is a play on words of hospitaler, which literally jumps into the Knights Hospitallers, and you also have that word healer and hospitals and what was it called, magic and Christian ideas and stuff. So even going into the 9th century with the coming of the Vikings and their ideas of healer and hospitaler and medical ideas and stuff, it's a blur, because a lot of people were playing around with herbs in that period and stuff. So they, the usage of that language is very, very funny. Even on top of that as well, you've got people then punished for using unnatural magic. And that's where when people turn around and say, men and women weren't burned for witchcraft in the medieval period, they were burned for heresy. It's like, it's funny, because there does seem to be punishments for using then what people refer to as unnatural magic, which is anything that's non-Christian, where you're basically, instead of praying to God and using God's natural magic, you might start doing, saying stuff or, wishing unwell to somebody around you. And you can see a lot of those examples both in Iceland, where someone's in a blood feud. If you look at the Icelandic sagas and people are in blood feuds, they're using what you would refer to as unnatural magic. And then there's indications of punishments for that. And you can see those punishments both in Iceland and in Ireland as well, where people are doing unnatural things and then punishments existing for that. Now, granted, in Ireland, it most likely wasn't burning. They were probably drowned as a way of cleansing their soul, but it's debatable,
Yeah, I think this underscores what I keep saying is which period, which place.
Yeah, 100%.
But generally, when most people imagine witchcraft, they're imagining, black magic in concert with the devil and that sort of thing. And that doesn't seem to be a medieval idea until the very end of the 15th century. Then you have the hammer of witches that crops up. But there's also this idea that, well, if someone managed to heal someone, then they would be accused of being in league with the devil. That's not a medieval thing. Healing happens all the time in the Middle Ages in concert with sympathetic magic that is divinely based. Charms are a thing. People don't get burned at the stake for using charms to resort in healing. Now, people will be executed if they're found guilty of using magic to kill people, but that's because they use magic to kill people.
And the best example of that is actually in Kilkenny. I don't know if you could probably correct me on this one. I think the earliest case is in Kilkenny in the early 14th century, believe it or not, with the Alice Kettler case, where her maid ends up getting burnt. They tried burning Alice Kettler, but she managed to escape because of the contacts she had made, because of her finance circles and stuff to do with, I don't know if you should call it like early banking or whatever, but there's kind of like a system in place where people are, moving their money around and stuff to do with the finances of and the thing is like, this is very, very early finances that we know today, kind of like the foundation of it. And it was just after the Knights Templars had been rounded up and, disposed of, So we still have these very early ideas of finances, but Ellis Kettler was just the queen of it. She was so good, but she had multiple husbands that had disappeared. So a lot of people were accusing her of using unnatural magic. And it's funny because they do use language that you see then repeated again and again and again to do with witchcraft, as in her, worshiping the devil and all that kind of stuff. So the Alice Kettler case is very unique, especially since it's very early 14th century. And I say it's interesting because in the early medieval period, we have a completely different interpretation of what is witchcraft, especially to do with Scandinavia and Ireland and stuff. So it's a very kind of different interpretation. But the interpretation that we get then in the 17th century, we can actually see the roots of it with the Ellis Kettler case. Like everything we can imagine about, devil worshipping and all that stuff. The Ellis Kettler case is so strange because all these themes are there. And what's even stranger about it, it's the same group of men who were involved with the Ellis Kettler case. Their families and stuff are also reappearing with the Joan of Arc case, because I was following. I was like, okay, so what happened with these people afterwards? And then I noticed it was not the same people per se, but the same families were popping up again in the Joan of Arc case. And I was like, okay, that's conspiracy level I'm looking at.
Well, I mean, Joan of Arc wasn't burned as a witch or even for witchcraft. She was burned as a heretic, but she was also a political sacrificial lamb.
Oh, yeah. But I just found it so funny because the Alice Kettler case, they wanted to get rid of her because she was too successful finance-wise. And I just found it very funny. Although she was born, both cases, technically speaking, were both burned for heresy. But the same language was reappearing again with the Joan of Arc case. And I was like, oh, that's funny.
Yeah, that is funny. So speaking of Joan of Arc, Vault kindly came back, provided the sources in question, and like I said, they are absolutely they're after her life. So if you're talking about the trial for the rehabilitation of Joan, so for those of you who don't know, this is really funny about Joan of Arc. Most of everything we so-called know about her postdates her life. So after she is she's burnt at the stake, and then about 30 years later ish, they put her trial on trial because they want to rehabilitate her. So they actually say that her trial was unfair and that it therefore came to a false and villainous conclusion. And so what Vault has actually kindly provided that the trial of rehabilitation, the procès en nullité de la condamnation de Jeanne d'Arc, right, from 1450 to 1456. So that's long after she had died and long after any of those events had actually happened. And so you're relying on the memories of people who, it's been 30 years or more since she died. So I would honestly question and the whole purpose of that trial was to rehabilitate her, right? The whole purpose of that trial was to turn her into a hero. So they're going to specifically say things that will make her seem even more virtuous, even more unassailable. And what could be more unassailable for a pucelle, a maiden, than that maiden calling out her fellow soldiers on their less than virtuous nighttime activities? So I would question whether she actually did that and said that, or if they retroactively made her say that and do that. That's what I mean by you can't just take at face value these chronicles, and especially that trial. That trial was politically motivated. Joan of Arc is one of the most political figures in history, not in her life, even in her lifetime, but even after that. Throughout history, she keeps getting dredged up and used by various political parties across history to make a point or a statement. She represents both the plight of the commoner and also the white nationalists in France have glommed onto her, right? So so you can't, especially with Jeanne d'Arc, you can't take at face value any part of her history. You really have to dig pretty deeply in it. And the same thing, the same thing with the second source, Les Vigiles du Roi Charles VII, right? You have to take that very carefully. Yeah. and both of those accounts are from about the same era, and they rely on a lot of the same accounts. So yeah, they're going to say similar things. That doesn't make them correct or true. unfortunately. It often happens that one chronicler will copy another, or two chroniclers will interview the same people for their chronicle if it's about vaguely the same thing. So they're going to say the same things. Yeah. But Vault, appreciate you providing me with those sources. I hope you don't think I'm attacking you. I wasn't trying to attack you. I was just debating in a friendly way and pointing out why those sources might not be the most accurate. Yeah, what do you think, Philip?
Yeah, 100%. You can even see by the actions of both Burgundy and the court in Paris at the time that she basically turned into a giant, what was it called, political message. And even like everyone's actions that happened, the way everything was moved into place and stuff, from the perspective of Burgundy looking to, send a message, to the way that the English were trying to get her out of the way, to even the French court multiple times could have paid off her, what was it called, her ransom fee, refusing to pay her ransom fee because ultimately, and everybody knew at that point, Paris was sick of her because she became too much. Random conspiracies just randomly popped up in my head, but it will, at this point, it is the fact that it becomes very, very obvious that the French, she had become too much a symbol of France at that point, and she was, she wanted to continue the war where the French king had, right, okay, we're in a safe position now, we can regroup, we can fix our administration. Joan wanted to go all the way, she wanted to take over.
She wanted Paris back, right? And Charles promised, oh yeah, sure, we'll take back Paris. And then he's like, oh, but do we need to? Do we need to? And she kept pushing and pushing and pushing. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, to be quite honest with you, I actually think she was right. She was in a position where she could have actually steamrolled through all of it and putting the King of France in a very, very positive position. But he couldn't see, he had no clue what the administration of both the English and the Burgundians was like at the time. He didn't realize he could actually steamroll through the two of them. And he even put himself in a pretty good position because suddenly, on the other side, you have the likes of the Hussite Wars and everything that are kicking off, pulling other European nations into that problem, giving her, France a brilliant opportunity to completely milk that whole entire area and stuff. Although Joan of Arc herself wanted to go over and get involved with the Hussite Wars, didn't she?
Thank you, Vault, for confirming. I can get impassioned sometimes, and so sometimes the way I present information can be intimidating, and I don't want to steamroll over anyone who has a valid opinion or take about history. Appreciate the conversation, Vault. It's been fantastic. Yeah. Okay, so let me see. Moving through our comments. Takeda says, what I've always wondered is why Joan of Arc was siding with France, since the area she was from was still under the control of the Holy Roman Empire at the time. It was more close culturally to the Ile-de-France. Yeah, I've also, if you go based on what's reported, it's because she, literally God told her to, right? That's why. So, I'm not going to get into a conversation about whether she was schizophrenic or whether it was really God or what. I'm not wandering down that path. But hypothetically, it's because she was told to do so by the voices. So, yeah, who knows?
The voices.
I mean, I'm not, there is more under heaven and earth than is contained in our books, Horatio. So I'm not going to say that, I'm not going to say whether I believe that she was actually receiving divine inspiration or not. Not even going down that path, but that's why she decided to side with France, I guess. But also she was French speaking, so. Yeah. Okay. Let's see, do we have any other question? Did Irish oh my God. Oh God. Okay. Did Irish cavalries or Celtic cavalries use crossbows back then, or just regular longbows, or not longbows but recurve bows? Okay, could we be a little back then is a long period of history.
Yeah, This is broken into, like, are you talking about the
Yeah.
early medieval period, the high Middle Ages, or are you talking about the late medieval period? Okay, so I'm just going to talk broad about this. When you say Cavaliers, it's such a funny way to
Cavalry.
put it. A
Yeah.
Celtic
Did they even have a
Okay, right.
cavalry? I mean, did they?
Well, yeah, they did have like the
But
Ridera and all that kind of stuff. Like there is Irish knights who are more influenced by Scandinavia than they're influenced by the English and the French. It literally, like, the word is
yeah,
Ridera, which is
rider.
Irish
Yeah,
knight.
literally rider.
Yeah, so you can, and it's crazy how similar that word is, and the way that they're described in the Vision of Tundle or in the Lewis chess pieces and stuff. You can see that influence from Norway, then from Norway into the greater Scandinavian world, and then from the greater Scandinavian world to Kiev and the Byzantine Empire. I, like, even, what was it, 2 weeks ago, only seen that. I said it to Yuki last night. I was like, Yuki, look at this word and how close they are to the way the Byzantines are using it and stuff. So it's still something I'm trying to investigate into, but it is very, very fascinating, the similarities and how the evolution actually comes from Scandinavia rather than England or Scotland, because we keep having this image of the English are bringing everything to Ireland, because the English took over, didn't they? That's not the case at all. Like, Irish Knights are actually heavily influenced by what's happening in Scandinavia, just because the terrain is rough in Scandinavia and they're revolving around boats for movement, compared to in, what was it? Also similar to Ireland, where boats are used for fast traveling and the terrain is rough. So it doesn't surprise me that we see similarities with the
Right. So,
evolution of
so,
knights
so
in
what
both
about the
Scandinavia
bows
and
that they
Ireland.
used? Are they, what kind of bows
Okay,
did they have in first millennium? Definitely not the crossbow, and
right. So the
not in first
crossbow is
millennium
brought
Ireland
over.
anyway.
So the crossbow is, well, actually, we have crossbows in 5th century in Pictish effigies. So in Pictish effigies, we do have crossbows. So it's still in the realm of debate. Did we have crossbows in, what was it called? The 5th and 6th century, the late antiquity of Ireland. So that's very, 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 very debated. Then the first actual crossbow finds we have actually come from Cork, where I'm from. So where I'm from, we do have crossbows brought in by the Vikings. So once again, Scandinavians are bringing in crossbows into Ireland. They're mostly, we do actually have examples of them used for fighting, but they're mostly used for taking on game and stuff. So if there's birds and all that kind of stuff, we do have crossbows and the majority of the arrowheads used for the crossbow they're basically like padded heads, and they're used basically to hit animals, but not to penetrate or damage the actual fur or skin of the animal, just to knock it down. So we do have crossbows in Ireland, but we do prefer to use darts and javelins. When it comes down to longbows, look at Rambling Kern, because we do have longbow, which is weird, by the way. We do actually have longbow finds from the Bronze Age in Ireland, but look over to Rambling Kern. He has an entire series of videos on the development of the longbow in Ireland, and then it miraculously just disappears going into the early medieval period. However, the Hiberno-Scandinavians, the men of Dublin, do get involved, and maybe hired Welsh mercenaries who had longbows at the time of the early medieval period. It's not active. We don't actually train Irish longbowmen until the late medieval period with the Fitzgeralds and the Butlers. The Fitzgeralds and Butlers train Irish longbowmen. So it kind of disappears going into the early medieval period, and then it reappears again going into the late medieval period, with the English longbow starts getting trained up and made in Ireland in the late medieval period with the Fitzgeralds and Butlers. So are you asking, did they use it on top of the horses and stuff?
If it's
I don't know
cavalry,
any
that's the thing.
example of that.
Cavalry is very
Yeah,
specific. You're on a horse. So if you mean
yeah.
from horseback, that's not. I don't have lots of
Because
evidence of that.
to be honest
Yeah.
with you, yeah, to be honest with you, just javelins and darts, because it's so effective in Ireland. If you look at Richard II's invasion of Ireland, and we need to do more testing on this, can javelins and darts penetrate full plate armor? Because according to Richard II's account in Ireland by French historians and stuff. Sorry, not French historians. Rachel knows the example I'm talking about. But according to himself, the man who recorded Richard II in Ireland, who's the Frenchman, he records darts and javelins penetrating the early 15th century full plate armor.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that is recorded of actually working. And all the depictions of that is javelin and dart man coming over, throwing their dart or throwing their javelin into the armor, and allegedly it penetrating the armor at the time. So it was working. And they're just so much more effective. Like if you're thinking about at the time crossbow, you have to set up the crossbow and do all this mad stuff. And then that's the same thing with the longbow, like trying to train up someone to use the longbow and stuff. It's just the way that warfare is in Ireland. It's just a million times easier just to have someone gallop, throw their javelin or dart, and then just go off again. It's just so effective in Ireland, and just the way the style of warfare is. And it's not just the Irish who are kicked onto this style of warfare. Even with the English, when they come in here, go into Ireland, they specifically hire men with hobbler horses and with javelins and stuff to harass the enemy, because it works in Irish warfare.
Yeah,
you know?
I mean, if it's not broken, don't fix it. And I mean, you're right.
Yeah.
Longbows require so much training to actually be able to shoot well. That's what killed the longbow.
Yeah.
It wasn't. That's the funny thing. People think it was black powder that killed the longbow. It's because it takes a lot less training to get decent at shooting an arquebus than it does to get good at shooting a longbow, right? So, longbows, and using a longbow from horseback, Jesus, I can't even. I
think there's examples of it in the 100 Years' War in
longbow
France.
from horseback. I don't even know if that's possible.
It's
because of,
oh my god, the name of that historian
because
is gone
I mean, I could see
but
using bows, but a longbow is a very specific thing and requires a lot of pull.
But there's no examples of that being used like that in Ireland. It's always like, and the longbow is in the late medieval period. The Fitzgeralds and Butlers have Irish longbowmen, but they're never described as mounted, because the Fitzgeralds and Butlers also have mounted hobbler horsemen who are using javelins and darts and stuff, and they're very effective to just get in there, harass the enemy, and off they go again. Like, they just do their job so well.
So, Ireland, as always, every country has its circumstance, or every country, by I don't mean nation, I mean like geographic region, has its circumstances that make certain weapons more effective than others. So
Yeah, that's another example as well. I forgot about that. We also have the examples in Japan of them doing the same thing, using the longbow from the horse as well. But God, it must be so
Takeda, that's cheating. We're not. He said, okay, they modified it to be shorter on the bottom and not center grip. Yeah, okay, that's the point. That was my point. Medieval European longbows were center gripped. I can't imagine shooting a center gripped longbow from horseback. How? You're going to catch your leg, for God's sake. Yeah. Oh yeah, it's a good point. Crossbow, anyone can fire it, and especially once they invent those pulleys, the cranks for the crossbows, no problem. Not even an issue to draw it and knock your bolt, right? Okay.
Because we do have plenty of examples of dismounted use of crossbows, especially in the southeast of the island. But when it comes down to mounted, I can't imagine them using crossbow mounted. Debatable in the 5th century, to be quite honest with you. But when it comes down to what was it called? High and late medieval period, the javelins and darts are just so effective. From mounted.
Yeah, especially with hobbler horses. Oh my God, there's an image. A longbow on a hobbler horse. It would get stuck in the mud. The bottom.
Poor horse. It doesn't even know what's going on. It's just going around in a circle trying to get itself over the mud.
Oh my goodness. Okay. So that was all talking about oh, thank you, Vault. Really appreciate that. So yeah, talking about this all started with us talking about female spies, and of course, invariably, we end up talking about Joan of Arc. That is just how 15th century history goes. You talk about women involved
Oh,
in war, and Joan always crops up. But I think what's really interesting about this research is that I wrote down some names because I want these names to be heard. We actually know the names of these women. Like we know names of female spies, of female agents in the 15th century. And I just think that's great.
mm.
So one woman was named Josine Hellebout, and Josine is a French name. Hellebout, I don't even know what that is. It could be Flemish, in which case I have no idea if I'm pronouncing it correctly. But she went on 11 missions, right? She had separate 11 separate missions she was paid for. Another woman, Twinines Peppers, she's the woman who went after the king of the Romans. Like it's literally in the account. They refer to Maximilian as the king of the Romans, and she's sent to go and ascertain the situation with the king of the Romans, which literally means she's not delivering letters, she's going to spy. Ascertain the situation is euphemism for spying. Right. And so we actually know, thanks to the ridiculously detailed records that those fucking French revolutionaries didn't burn, we actually know the names of these women. Don't get me started on French revolutionaries. They can all go to hell. They deserve to burn in hell.
Okay.
I have some feelings about this. Oh, yeah. Okay. So any other questions about our spies or our, the paper? I forgot to write the name of the paper down. Everyone, I'll publish the name of the paper because it's a paper and it's freely available on a research platform, the paper on the Female Spy Network. And it's really fascinating. There's a lot of fantastic primary source citations. So it's not just digesting it and telling you to trust it. It actually cites these accounts and these chronicles and these eyewitness accounts. So I'll post that along with yesterday's book corner in my various communities, so you can all see the name of the actual paper and go read it for yourself. It's worth a read. It's not terribly long. It's like 20 or 30 pages. So for me, that's not terribly long. Yeah. Okay.
I think Cocky also brings up a very good point as well, that he has actual. What's the source for that one though? I think I read. The French used mounted crossbow a decent bit in the mid and late 100 Years' War. Yeah, I was thinking that as well. That we might have examples in around the north of Italy, probably even South Germany area, and in France of them using mounted crossbowmen and stuff, especially in that big open area and stuff. It's just. For Irish warfare, the way that you have rough terrain and you're zipping and zapping around the place and stuff, I just can't imagine crossbows being effective, especially with all the grinding and stuff that you need to do. It's just the Irish are just, and everyone says it over and over again in the literature, when they invade into Ireland, they're always just knocked back by the way the Irish are able to zip out from a really tough terrain, hit them hard and heavy with a javelin or a dart or whatever, and then quickly get back into the tough terrain again. So they're very difficult to chase. And they do it repeatedly, all throughout the entire time. Like it's not even a case of being inside of the battle that they're doing this kind of stuff. They're just harassing constantly, eating away at them. So when it comes down to warfare in France and the north of Italy, yeah, I can imagine that for sure, especially with that nice big open ground and stuff. But when it comes down to Irish warfare in the tough, boggy terrain, forest-like, I just think that the hobble horse is just so good and nimble, especially when you've got a man just constantly harassing with darts and javelins.
Right. Yeah. So we've got a really good question, actually, which will allow us to dispel yet another medieval myth. In an age where perhaps women didn't have much access to education, and generally were female spies literate generally to convey their findings, or did they use alternate methods? Well, actually, by the 15th century, most women are literate, because there is Sunday school, which is not what Sunday school is now. There's schools set up all across Europe, convent schools, monastic schools. Right, so people are taught to read. They might not be able to write, But, these women that they're hiring, they no doubt could read. They might not be able to write, but they probably could also. And they were probably taking notes. It would be fascinating if we could find these notes. But just as many, I would say, honestly, that just as many women in the 15th century are literate as men are. So there's this weird idea that the Middle Ages is a benighted, illiterate time. And part of it is, I think Charlemagne couldn't actually read, if I recall correctly. Right?
No,
He
you
was
couldn't.
illiterate,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
that's the 8th century, right? This is the 15th century, and a lot has changed. So by the 15th century, many people are absolutely literate, especially by the 1480s. Remember, this is after the printing press. So now, yes, that doesn't make books cheap, but what you can do with the printing press that isn't so expensive is make pamphlets. So so I would say that these women were probably literate, but that wasn't rare in this time. That wasn't like it is, like it would have in the 8th century. Yeah, anyone being literate would have been pretty rare, but this is the 15th century. It's a different time.
Yeah. Yeah, I fully agree with that one. Because in Ireland, the only women that could read and write were the women that hung around the monastic settlements in the cities. And that's because of the fact that they were constantly around the administration books and stuff, that they would have had to sit down and sort out the administration of the monastic settlements, which is, it's only a history we're starting to get into now, is the lives of nuns, especially nuns who have to do the administration inside the monastic settlements and stuff. Because I know people kind of have this idea of nuns kind of just praying all day.
Right.
Just kind of, what do people imagine nuns did all day? I don't know. But regardless, what they actually spent a good chunk of the day doing is actually the accountancy for a lot of these monastic settlements. In fact, I remember coming across one quote from Gone Medieval. I can't remember. It was when they were covering German nuns, and I think it was the German nuns, but it was seen as a woman's job to do the accountancy. And you can see the same thing in the home as well. In the home, it's the woman who's in charge of the administration, because when we think of women of the medieval period, we think of it as the woman's place is in the kitchen. And that's a very kind of 19th century perspective. When dealing with the medieval period, a woman's place is the administration. Yeah. So a man is expected to go off to war, but the woman is expected to do all of the administration. And that's even keeping down men that are under her. She's expected to keep those men who are under her down and in their place and stuff. So she's in charge of the entire administration, and that's to keep, that's to explain that the gender roles for women in the medieval period are different to the gender roles of the 19th century, because we're coming at it from a very 19th century perspective of a woman's place is in the kitchen. Actually, it's not. A woman's place is in the administration, and that includes accountancy. So then it goes into this whole thing of, especially recently, where so many German historians and academics are now looking at the nuns to see if they can find even more information to what's going on. Like, Rachel, you're a complete ninja recently when it comes down to 15th century bookkeeping and stuff, and seeing exactly what's going on. It's like you understand the language. Maybe you're talking to a woman thousands of years in the past or something.
Yeah,
I don't know.
That could be. People often ask me if I'm literally a resurrected medieval woman. Yeah, it is very interesting. You hit on a really good point, and that is that the idea of womanhood, actually, and even that idea of the woman in the kitchen, isn't a 19th century idea. The Victorians start inventing the idea of the angel in the home in the second half of the 19th century. That's for a tiny subset of society, right? So the idea of the woman being in the kitchen is a 20th century idea. And that is a very recent development. And yeah, in the Middle Ages, head cooks were usually men. By the way, the cooks were usually men in the Middle Ages, not usually women. And like you said, the women, and that's whether they're noble women or they're merchant class, handcraft class, even at the peasant class, especially once they started, handling their own affairs and their own businesses as sharecroppers instead of as serfs, they also had to keep records. So yeah, the women are in charge of the administration. That's an acknowledged role throughout most of Europe in the Middle Ages, that is the women's role. And yeah, in Italy, you've got the
Mm.
men, they've got their books of their ricordanze that they're keeping track of. But if the husband dies and you have a widow who's there, she has to be able to just pick up and keep going. And even still, she's handling a lot of the household domestic matters. If he's handling the business, she's handling the household, and the household is basically a business in and of itself. So yeah, the
Yeah.
idea of the woman in the kitchen and illiterate women is a very
Mm.
it's a very interesting set of myths that have developed. And it's basically, as far as I can tell, in Europe anyway, and this is not like Greece. I think in ancient Greece women were generally illiterate, like on purpose, like in Athens. In classical Athens, if I remember, women are the ladies, the noble women are kept illiterate. Meanwhile, the courtesans are educated, which is why all the husbands want to go spend time with the educated courtesans who can read and
Mm.
write. But that's not medieval Europe.
Mm.
Yeah. And of course, again, Europe is not a monolith across the 1,000 years or the 1,000 miles of Europe. It's it's all, your mileage will vary based on specifically, and sometimes your mileage, like this is true in Ireland, sometimes your mileage will vary from city to city in the same region. So, the situation
Mm.
for women in Frankfurt in 1410 is not necessarily going to be the same as the situation for women in Ulm in 1410.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so what next piece of news do we have? What's next
Yeah.
on
Oh,
the
wait, one
list?
one more very good question for the spies. Did they use
Oh, yeah.
ciphers and the like? Ciphers. That is an interesting thing. So here's the thing about ciphers. So we don't have any evidence of them using ciphers, but I suspect they didn't have to. Philip, why do you think the women
Mm.
probably in the 15th century probably didn't have to use ciphers?
Because they thought they were just silly women,
Yeah,
didn't they?
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Why would you need to hide anything when no one thinks you have anything to hide anyway?
Mm.
Yeah, women using ciphers. I think that so this is the weird thing. This is like one of the last examples for a while in Western European history of women being used actively in the spy network. By
Mm.
Elizabeth's court, Elizabeth the First of England, I was reading, she's no longer using women spies. She's only using men. So that
Okay.
might be one of those post-Reformation shifts. It's like, oh,
Mm.
it's now the Reformation, women suck. We can't use them. Just to oversimplify it and also to trigger the algorithm. Okay.
Yeah, Elizabeth has a weird relationship with women.
Yeah.
You would assume that she would be very pro women, and but instead, what you get when you're actually inside of her court, she seems to be very aggressive towards other women, especially towards their husbands and stuff. She seems to be very kind of domineering and clinging and stuff. But then I'm looking at it from a very Irish anti-Elizabeth perspective.
Yeah. Well, I suspect that in part, she was a product of her times, right? She was raised in that court where her father was this domineering man who liked women but also didn't like women. It was his relationship with women was complicated, and she grew up in a world where almost all of her royal peers were yeah, by which I mean her peers, her fellow royals across Europe were men. So it wouldn't
Yeah.
surprise me if to a certain extent she had kind of, as we say in American English, making a really grotesque reference to Jonestown, she had drunk the Kool-Aid, right? She
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
part of that culture, and she was not a women's liber. She
Yeah.
wasn't, I wouldn't say she was anti-woman, but she wasn't progressive necessarily in that way.
Mm-mm. Because I just find that Grace O'Malley is a better example. If you want to have like a figure of a strong, independent woman, but then I am very, very, very much looking at it from a very kind of pro Irish way. So maybe that's why I'm so like pro Grace O'Malley over Elizabeth. Like it's just so many examples of Grace O'Malley just grabbing the horn of the bull and just kind of taking control of it and stuff. Even just abusing her husband at the time and
Right.
stuff, and going off and committing
Yeah, she's
piracy
she's a
constantly, and
fascinating
just like
character.
takes
For those of you, so
yeah.
have you seen? speaking of our fellow YouTube history tubers, have you seen extra credits episodes on her? Extra credit histories episodes on her. You
I haven't
should.
seen
They're
that one, to
pretty
be
good.
honest with you.
Go and watch it.
Yeah.
So next week, Philip, we're going to talk about extra credits histories take on her, because I think it'll be interesting to talk about her and also get your opinion on how they presented her history.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Definitely have to go off that. Elizabeth, I believed, was just joined.
Yeah, okay. So it looks like I think we're ready to move on to the next thing in our what does the magic 8 ball have for us?
No, that's how I feel. Oh yes, this one. Okay, so not everyone will probably find this interesting, but I find it really interesting because I like 10th century burial graves and stuff. Of course, continuing the theme of women's history, which I didn't plan, by the way. I just kind of
This was an
like
accident.
put this
We
all
did not
together.
coordinate
Yeah,
in
yeah.
any way today.
Now, this doesn't prove that women were, women existed in Ireland in the
We
10th
know that,
century.
Philip, we
I
know they
still
didn't.
believe
There were no women in Ireland in the
I
century.
still believe that women did not exist in 10th century Ireland. However, we do have evidence that women did exist in Norway in 10th century Norway. So here we can actually see a high status Viking boat burial. And that's the key point here. Because, God, when it comes down to boat burials, it starts so many arguments, not just in the living history world, but throughout the whole historical Viking world, because people like this kind of idea of them making a boat and then kicking the boat off and then setting
Oh
the boat on
God, do
fire and
they? They
stuff. So
love that
there's
idea.
yeah, so it starts arguments over and over and over again within the Viking community or even the historical and academic science. So in Ireland, it's quite interesting. Just taking it from an Irish perspective of now is because we don't actually have any boat finds in Ireland. As in, we do have boat finds in Ireland. We do know that boats were made in Dublin, so Viking style boats were
Yeah,
being
yeah,
made in
weren't
Dublin,
they being made
especially
there
in
and
the
then
10th century.
exported, right? Right?
Yes, so we even in Denmark they tested the wood and they found out that the boat itself was being made in Dublin. So Dublin was making a lot of boats. So once again, in Ireland, on the other hand, so this is where it gets quite interesting. So we can't turn around and say, oh, well, maybe Ireland wasn't making any boats. No, we have loads. The most sophisticated, best boats were made in Dublin at the time. So we have the best boats in Europe at the time. So you can't turn around later on when I explain myself and say, oh, well, there was no boats. So basically, Vikings in Ireland, the Vikings immigrate into Ireland, and they start getting buried. And in the 9th century,
They start getting buried.
yeah, because eventually they pass away, so they start burying these people, and basically in Norway and in Scotland, when they're burying people who are Norse, what they do is they put them into a little boat, as you can see with the slide, and then they put the person into the boat, and then they bury the boat, right? And this is really, really interesting because we can see here this is a burial from the 10th century. Is that she's not really buried that deep into the ground? It's a very kind of shallow grave. So even in itself, that's quite interesting that it's not a very deep
Right.
burial. It's
That
very
is like
shallow.
you can see the surface of the ground around that.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Okay.
Mm-mm. Now, that's interesting in itself. Now, in Ireland, for some strange reason, when the same Norse group of people are immigrating into Ireland in the 9th century, they're not having these boat burials. They're not burying them in boats, but instead, what they're doing instead is they're getting rocks and they're making boat-shaped rocks. They're putting the rocks in a kind of boat shape around the
Oh,
person and then just
so
burying
it's
the person.
symbolic basically
So
rather
it's like,
than real
yeah,
interesting.
like why are they doing this in the 9th century Ireland? It's so interesting. And then when it goes into the 10th century, they just completely abandoned ship. They just buried themselves like the kind of Celtic Christians. And I say Celtic Christians or insular Christians because their burial goods are a mixture of both Christian and paganism. Like
Right.
they're getting buried with Odin symbols and
Right.
Christian symbols, like crosses and stuff. So it's very curious that when going into the 10th century, they're kind of taking on a kind of Irish Christian interpretation of, oh, well, we believe in the one God, we believe in Jesus, but we also have our kind of sort of folklore beliefs as well of Odin and, the Morgan
Right.
and all that kind of belief in there as well, which is very playing on the Irish as a whole, because you see this kind of team in Ireland from both Dublin all the way over to Galway of, yeah, we believe in,
Yeah.
Jesus and God, but we also believe in the fairy folk in the
But
back
well,
of
you
our
know what I mean?
garden.
If one deity is good, then multiple must be better, right? Quantity, baby, quantity.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, because you can see that with the Hiberno-Scandinavians in England, when they're erecting crosses in England, they have on the front of it, they'll have like an entire thing dedicated to Jesus, and then on the back of it, they have a whole thing dedicated to Loki. So it's like, what the hell is going on here? And so it's very interesting that we can track this kind of branch of evolution from Norway. So this is from the 10th century. So the earliest type that we can find is in Norway once again. In the very start of the Viking Age, around 820, we start to see these kind of boat burials of this style popping up. Now, once again, you guys in the comment section can easily find earlier finds of this, even in England with the Anglo-Saxons in the, what was it called, the 6th century. We obviously have boat finds. One of the most famous one of all
Yeah,
is the
Sutton Hoo.
Sutton Hoo
Yep.
find. Yeah, so we can see the entire evolution of boat burials in what was it called, in basically the North Atlantic Sea, from Norway to Iceland to Denmark to England to even Ireland. But it's just interesting that in Ireland there's no boat burials. Like, why aren't the Irish, burying themselves in
Right.
a boat? Even more so at this point, because the Hiberno-Scandinavians, the Irish Vikings, if you want to put it into a dumb language, they still have connections with Norway, and yet we still in Ireland haven't found any of these boat burial finds in Ireland. We're just finding at this point in the 10th century, when this is done, a mixture of, kind of more of a Christian style burial of them just burying themselves in monastic grounds and stuff, or some form of holy ground, and then having a mixture and by the way, this is in holy ground, a mixture of like Odin inside there. We put a bit of Jesus inside there as well.
Jesus.
It's fascinating. Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. Absolutely
so,
wild.
was any metal found in this dig? Do you know? Is there like a catalog of the
Yeah,
finds?
we do, and the actual link itself hasn't gone up yet, but it is being studied by what was it called? I think it's the. Let me quickly scan through that one, because I did put it in there. Oh yeah, there we go. The University Museum of Norway. So they've been studying this place since 2022, when it was metal detectors picked it up and then reported it over to the Norway Museum, the University Norway Museum. They reported to them, and then they sent out their archaeologists by 2023. Right. And then, from my understanding, it's only recently, piece by piece, that they're bringing this stuff over to the museum for further study. So I haven't found the actual paper itself that has been released yet, but it did pop up on my radar this week, because they're slowly but surely moving this over to the Norway Museum itself. So hopefully at some stage it will be put out on presentation and stuff, or at least be moved around between the different universities and stuff, because it's great, because she actually has her turtle brooches and stuff, which have been found. So if you're into what was it called, early medieval reenactment and stuff, definitely keep an eye on this one, especially when it comes down to bronze overall finds and stuff as well. And also on top of that as well, there is a woven sword. So for weaving and stuff in the Viking Age and stuff, they would have used a sword to help with all that kind of stuff. I'm not sure. I haven't actually seen somebody actually use the sword for various techniques and stuff when it comes down to weaving myself, when it comes down to reenactment. But it is there in all the finds. In fact, in Dublin, Cork, where I live, I should remember that and not mix it up against before someone slaps me in the comment section. But where I'm from, in Cork when they were doing the archaeological digs. They actually were doing it on one of the houses in Cork, and inside the house they actually found a weaving knife that is made of wood, and it's got this beautiful. All you have to do is type in Viking sword, and not an actual sword pops up. It's actually a wooden sword for weaving pops up, and it's got the most beautiful decorative designs and it carved into it. It's absolutely gorgeous. So it is very, very interesting to do later on, especially when this gets released, to be able to combine the finds from this one to combine it to Cork. I'll definitely be looking out for it to see what the differences
do we
are.
know how she died or why? Has cause of death been ascertained?
Not yet. As of yet, I haven't found anything to confirm or even indicate what she passed away from. As of right now, I only have the hard facts that the museum has been releasing, but hopefully at some point it'll give like the full announcement of how she passed away, what kind of damages are to her bones, all those little details, even what the brooch looks like, because that's definitely something many people
so
are
often
looking
in these graves from this era with those turtle brooches, they often find bits of textile that survive inside the turtle brooch because it basically forms like a little protective container around it. So I'm really wondering if they found even just a little 2 centimeter by 2 centimeter piece of something inside those turtle brooches. I guess that didn't come out. That hasn't come out yet in what they've reported thus far, whether textiles were found or not.
Not that I found online so far, unless somebody has a website where this is
all labeled out
put
more
onto.
detail. When was this found? When was our boat found?
So the official one was on 2023. I don't actually have the date here. I think I came across the date somewhere. So the date is somewhere online. I just forgot to post it up. Sorry about that, guys. But what was it called? Was it metal detectors came across it in 2022. So in 2022, it was metal detectors that first came across it and then revealed it around 2023. But the earliest one was 2022, where they became somewhat aware of this. And then it was the museum then confirmed it in 2023. I don't have the exact date on that one.
Right. Well, 20. I just wondered year. I was like 2023 is good enough for me. If you'd said last week, we'd be having I'd have different follow-up questions. So was there any metal in there? The answer is yes, definitely. Those turtle brooches are really interesting. Wow, how fascinating.
I think there was other bits and bobs as well, because she was of a noble class. They confirmed she was a noble. So I think there is other bits of metal in there from, let me go through the list there. But yeah, there may have been bits of jewelry and rings and stuff as well, which I think was in the list as well. So there is other bits of metal inside there as well.
So I have to say, I'm reading here, it says high status artifacts, including spindle whorl and whalebone weaving sword, which indicate her status as a textile producer. And I got to tell you, I don't agree with that assessment at all, because often objects are put in these graves for symbolic purposes, not because they symbolize what we think they do. Often weaving tools are associated with women's work anyway in various eras and various societies. And so that could just have been, she didn't mean she was a textile producer per se. And because that makes it sound like she's some kind of fabric factory, right? Like she's producing cloth and she owns a fabric empire that spans from Constantinople to Greenland or something like that, right? That's not what that means. Almost always women's graves from this era, they nearly always have spindle whorls, and they nearly always have other weaving tools with them. So it was just what women did. That's just in this era, women are generally the ones. It's a home industry, right? It's just what you do in your homestead. It doesn't mean she was a textile producer. I think that makes it sound like other women weren't, like all women were. They all, when they were just sitting around by the fire, they were spinning, right? They were spinning wool thread, usually in Ireland particularly, right? They were making homespun woolen fabric because fabric that's imported is more expensive, and also there isn't a big fabric industry for common fabrics by this point. This isn't that era yet. There's an industry for silk, but not everyone is going to be able to afford silk in Ireland in what century was it? 8th century, 9th century,
This is
10th
the 10th.
century,
Well,
10th century,
yeah,
10th
this
century,
is the
right,
10th
right,
century.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
So the fact that she was found with a spindle whorl and a beater, what they call the weaving sword. I mean, Jesus Christ, how much more can we masculinize this? A weaving sword.
But it was called weaving sword in the court
I
find
know.
as
I
well.
saw
Are
that.
you
I
not finding
don't.
that?
That's a very interesting turn of phrase, I have to say. It makes it sound like something it's not. It's not used for
Yeah,
offensive purposes or even defensive.
yeah.
It's a tool used to in the weaving process. Yeah, but
Mm, mm, mm.
I find it funny. It's also like, well, if they find an unidentified object in the grave and they can't figure out what it is, then it must be cultic in nature, right? It's got to be of
Mm,
religious significance. And yet it turns out that
mm,
it's
mm.
just, the way that certain materials degrade over time and actually started off shaped like this. So finding weaving implements in a woman's grave doesn't mean she was a textile producer. It means she did what every other woman did in this era in Ireland.
Mm, mm, mm. Yeah, I definitely do agree with that one. Okay.
Okay.
Any decent questions inside there? Bum, 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 bum. Christianity was forced upon them?
No.
No. Well, if you're talking about Ireland, well, Norway is funny because Norway has an entire civil war around it. But Ireland, no, I can't say any time in Ireland it was actually forced in. I think, and it was there. I can't find a single point where it's ever forced onto them. I know at the start, the language that the monks are using, the heathens. Does indicate that they were probably pushing for more violence towards Scandinavian settlers in Ireland and stuff. However, there doesn't, because you see that healthy transition from what was it called, Norse paganism. It kind of blurs with kind of Celtic paganism ideas and stuff, especially when you're looking at the likes of the Tomba Cooling and stuff. So there's kind of, and on top of that as well, it kind of goes into the role of folklore and stuff. Which is funny when, as I was saying there, looking at the grave goods and stuff, where you can see a Odin symbol and a Jesus cross inside there. So it seems to be like, oh, this is Jesus. He gets put into the pile and stuff during the 10th century in Ireland and stuff. And it, by the way a lot of people talk in literature and stuff, it seems to be a case of, okay, so you have God and Jesus. He's the religion. We're all Christians now. Oh, and we also have a bunch of fairies in the garden and stuff. That's perfectly acceptable, isn't it? And not just for the Norse. That seems to be the case also for the Irish themselves, because they still take what we call later on fairy trees very, very seriously. Mael Shockley the First goes out of his way to cut down Brian Brew's fairy tree, which is very questionable. Like, why does Brian Brew get so upset when his fairy tree is cut down? Because that's linked to Celtic paganism, and that's 10th century Ireland. This isn't Ireland back in the pagan period of the 4th century. So it does seem to be the case that both the and at the same time, this is, the Tomba Coola is written, where you have the likes of, Lug, the Morgan, Queen Maeve, but they're taken from more of a Christian perspective. It's not the perspective of the 5th century. So it does seem to be in Ireland a case of this kind of blur where it goes from paganism to kind of blurring between Christian and kind of folklore beliefs. The pagan gods kind of blur into folklore, and then going into the 11th century as a whole, both Waterford, Cork, and Dublin during the Reform seems to go, right, we're Christians, we're solid Christians, and now instead of having Odin, we have Saint Olaf.
Saint Olaf.
Saint Olaf becomes the
Saint Bridget.
Yeah. So another example. That's literally what the Gaelic do inside of Kildare. Is instead of having worshipping Bridget becomes Saint Bridget. So you see that transformation happening.
Yeah, it's interesting how often there is. I mean, yes, especially in more recent times, Christianity has been forced on people. I'm not going to debate that. 1,000,000%. Yeah. But that forcing is a much more recent phenomenon and isn't generally part of the early narrative of the Christian church, right? The Christian church, the original message, which has gotten mostly corrupted, by the way, but I'm not going to wander down that path. Anyway, the original message, like Jesus's original preachings, were really attractive in a society like ancient Rome, where you've got this massive slave force that's literally being held down by the state. And then along comes this dude, Jesus, and he says, hey, blessed are the poor. The meek shall inherit the earth.
Mm.
And the slaves are like, yeah, I can get behind that shit.
Yeah.
Right? So there's a lot of appeal about the original Christ's original message, especially to downtrodden peoples, right? Especially if you're living in a hierarchical society that's holding you down in part through its hierarchical religious practices, right? So, you know, in
Yeah,
the early
exactly.
days of Christianity, there was a lot of voluntary conversion. And sometimes people converted because they wanted the neat free tunic that was being offered as a reward for being baptized, not making this shit up. Hrolf the
Yeah.
Ganger and his men did that when they got baptized, or they or they get baptized so that they can become the Duke of Normandy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely fully agree. But I will elaborate on more on this on what was it called? You guys Wednesday night. So Wednesday night, and if you're living in Australia and Japan like I am, or the Philippines, it will be Thursday morning. So Thursday morning for us. For the rest of you guys, it'll be Wednesday night. Myself, Dr. Owen O'Neill, and Mihal from Clans and Dynasties will be talking about the conversion in Ireland from paganism to Christianity. So if you're interested in that, definitely pop in on Wednesday night so we can cover that big, massive topic of the conversion in Ireland from paganism to Christianity. Because there seems to be this constant running theme that St. Patrick came to Ireland and committed genocide. Which, if you actually read the sources of St. Patrick and St. Patrick's letter, you would never, he's the most harmless, nicest person on the planet. Like he's writing letters asking these pirates to please give back my what was it called, my good Christian people, like please be good to me, like because these raiders what's that?
Is this the same St. Patrick that had to lick the nipples of the captain on the ship?
Yeah, it's the same one. He writes another letter. He only has two surviving letters. One is
Oh my
the
god.
Confessio, where he describes that stuff, and the other one is the letter. Like the real Saint Patrick is so
Right,
different compared to our
right.
imagination of him. Like he's just a nice guy who just hangs around the Enale court and is like, "Okay, guys, let's go and do some mass." No, we'd rather not.
Yeah, right.
You know,
Oh my goodness.
completely the opposite. Like. Okay, so that's pretty much all I need to cover with boat burials until Wednesday night, anyway. And we're back to the whole thing of the pagan genocide that happened. I
Oh my
swear.
god. Yeah. Okay, so completely unrelated to anything religious. Yay. Oh, that's not what I wanted to do. That's the wrong screen. This one. Okay. Medieval blue ink recipe rediscovered. So this is particularly exciting for people in the medieval material culture world who are interested in recreating the arts and the crafts of the Middle Ages. So Philip, you've of course seen medieval manuscripts. Many of them have this beautiful blue paint and this beautiful blue ink, all in sometimes ink, like they actually write in this beautiful shade of blue.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they do, don't they? I think Book of Kells is one of the best examples as I quickly type it in to confirm what I'm saying. But I'm sure, yeah, the Book of Kells, it is. It's covered in blue and stuff. There's loads of
Right.
blue all over.
So the often, especially later on, that blue is made. The blue paint is made of lapis lazuli. It's actually literally ground semi-precious stone imported from Afghanistan, but the blue ink is not. And they apparently, it's this recipe. No one restores. People who work on restoring these medieval manuscripts had no idea what exactly that ink was. It was a mystery. Well, a group of researchers in Portugal have figured it out. They have found a
Oh, wow.
recipe in it's a 15th century illuminator's manual, a manual written by and for professional illuminators that contains dozens, if not hundreds, of recipes for inks and paints and other materials you will need as an illuminator. But the the original doesn't date to the 15th century. The original is the 13th century. So this has been around for a while. But what's fascinating about this manual, not only does it provide this recipe that these scientists, not living historians, these are honest to God scientists who use serious, expensive machinery to analyze the contents of the ink, some of the original ink, and then find a recipe that aligned with it. So the manuscript is written in Portuguese, but it is written in the Hebrew alphabet.
Jesus.
Yeah. So it was actually, it's part of the lost history of the Jews in medieval Europe, right? Like most people don't think of medieval Europe and think of the Jewish populations who thrived there once upon a time. But as of the 15th century in Portugal, there was still such a thriving Jewish community that they have a manual written on illumination, written in Portuguese, but using Hebrew, which means that they were speaking Portuguese, but using the Hebrew alphabet to write their documents and their texts. This also means there was probably a thriving Jewish community of painters and illuminators in Portugal in the 15th century, because otherwise, why would you write this manual that can really only be read by Jews? Because Gentiles are not going to be able to read the Hebrew are unlikely to be able to read the Hebrew alphabet in the 15th century in Portugal. So, but what's fascinating is they identified the plant, and we talked about this plant twice now in my medieval cooking show, because so you see that beautiful blue and that beautiful purple on the fabric scraps on the right. So those are all from this one plant, and what you see on the left are the little pods, the fruits of this plant. And the plant is called, and I'm going to read this because I keep saying it wrong because I don't say it aloud often enough. The plant is called Chrozophora tinctorius, and it is a weed. It's a weed. It just grows everywhere. It's not an expensive plant, and it's the fruit. Those little cute little tripods that you see there. It's the fruit. You squeeze the juice out of the fruit, but you have to be very careful. The scientists found out if you get the seeds produce this gum that basically dulls the paint. It makes it not a very nice bright color. But this is the same plant that is used to make purple and blue food dye in medieval recipes. So not only can you use it to paint, to make this amazing blue ink, which they made, but based on this recipe, but you can also use it to dye your food, your cheese. In fact, we did a medieval fried cheese recipe, and if I'd had some, I could have made one of the layers of the cheese a beautiful blue or a beautiful purple. And what's interesting is that the dye stuff is not indigo. It's not related to indigo. It's a completely different chemical. So it's not just like, oh, well, it's another plant that produces indigo. It does not. It's a completely different plant. And so now that they have this ink recipe, they can actually restore medieval manuscripts using the right materials now. Because there's a whole bunch of manuscripts that they have blue ink, but restorers have been hesitant to go and fix them because they don't have the right materials, and they didn't want to ruin it the way past restorers have ruined lots of artwork over the centuries by using the wrong materials. So yeah, for me, as someone who loves playing around with science and recipes, medieval recipes, and for all of you out there who are doing calligraphy and illumination, maybe, this manual, I didn't even know about this manual, and I was very excited to read about this work and how they successfully reproduced it and used it. And it's turned into this just gorgeous, gorgeous color. And so now we're going to be able to, a lot of those Irish manuscripts, right, that have been damaged over the years, now they'll be able to do restoration work using the right ink on them.
God, it's so amazing.
Yeah, Takeda, I don't know the common name of the plant. It probably has 20 of them.
Takeda, that comment off you is absolutely magnificent. You know that, like the one with the St. Patrick being a nice guy and St. Nicholas just punching your manner. I'm just like, I was there trying not to burst out laughing because I was trying to take what Rachel was serious, and I seen that I was like,
I know. So unfortunately, we've got a lag with the comments and what we're talking about. I wish I'd seen that comment when we were still talking about it.
Yeah,
you're so right. St. Patrick's was the nice guy. Nicholas was the asshole. But you know, Nicholas was a good asshole. He unpickled those 3 boys. So you know. Yeah.
Right.
So, and also some people might look at this picture and see the fabric there and think that this was used to dye fabric. We don't actually have evidence that was used to dye fabric, it's water soluble. The thing is that what you see on the right is actually how medieval illuminators stored many of their water-based pigments. So they would actually soak a piece of fabric, a scrap of fabric, linen like that. And then that's how they would store it in their kit. It would keep it stable because it's dry. And then they would put it in a little shell with water, and the water would leach the pigment out of it. And then there you have your paint. So this was a medieval method of storing watercolor pigments, was to actually infuse a piece of fabric with it like this. Yeah.
Okay, that is very, 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 very not just fascinating, but just opens up a huge, massive part of our own history, because you can even see that with Ireland going into the golden age of Ireland, it'll answer so many questions, and it's so exciting from an Irish perspective because of the fact that the Irish government has even invested so much money with Switzerland into studying Irish manuscripts in both Switzerland and in Ireland during the golden age of Ireland, which lasted from the 7th century all the way up to the 12th century. So if you didn't know, there was a massive migration of Irish monks from Ireland over to Switzerland to preach the word of God and stuff. And with that, because it was the golden age of Ireland, they had created a whole load of manuscripts. And because during the siege of the Four Courts that happened in 1923, we have a lot of manuscripts in Ireland which were destroyed
my heart
and damaged.
Every time, man. We're freaking revolutionaries and rebels. Just
it's disgusting. But Switzerland actually preserved all those Irish monk manuscripts and stuff. So we can still go over there to Switzerland and study that stuff. And funny enough, they're actually on display in Ireland for a very short time. I'm not sure when I think it's around going into Christmas, they're going to stop and bring that back over to Switzerland. For a short time period, they've actually brought those manuscripts over to Ireland for display for a very short time. So if you're actually in Ireland, definitely run over to that now and have an old stare for yourself, because it's not long until they'll be brought over to Switzerland. And some of them, sadly, will be brought back into the back of the museum. It won't even be put on display again for a very long time. So if you have the opportunity, definitely go and have a look at that. But there's so many answers which will be solved because of this.
Yeah, it is really interesting when science, I love it personally, when science and history come together like this to give us answers that shed a light on the past, but also allow people in the present to explore creativity, historical creativity, using authentic materials. And I'm excited because apparently it's not toxic. Like so many medieval pigments are toxic. I mean, like, oh my God, toxic. Yeah. White lead, red lead, orpiment, verdigris. It's like, oh wow, every single beautiful bright color is deadly. Yay.
This person suffers from syphilis.
Right, exactly. Are you suffering from paint toxicity? Let's see. Takeda says, I'm wondering if it might have been a local adaptation as the sea trade from the Eastern Med slowed and they found a local alternative. Maybe, but I mean, so what they could use instead for blue? Oh, you're talking about the lapis lazuli. Maybe also because lapis lazuli is crazy expensive in the Middle Ages. Philip, do you know where lapis lazuli comes from?
Oh, I do
Afghanistan. Not. So imagine importing in the Middle Ages, importing lapis lazuli from Afghanistan so that you can grind it into a powder and use it to paint stuff.
Okay. Because we also, in the Book of Kells, they tested a good chunk of it as well, and there's some of the pigments that are in it that are believed to have been brought all the way from Afghanistan as well. So you gotta, even during the Golden Age of Ireland, have that trade going on, but it doesn't really hit its peak until going into the Viking Age, and that's where Claire Downham, once again, quoting from Claire Downham, is arguing that Ireland did not have a kind of dark age plunder during the Viking Age. In fact, it had the complete opposite. It had a economic golden age, which, like, if you look, even read the book of the Annals of Ulster, which takes a year by year date, you know, straight away it's just screaming, hey, look, there's an economic golden age going on here. You know, instead of, don't get me wrong, it's also the dip of the golden age of Ireland. Like, we're no longer dealing with these saints and scholars going out there and massively converting thousands of people to the way of Jesus. But we're making lots of
Right.
money.
Yeah.
Give it the slave
Yeah.
trade.
Well, I mean, you know, the Vikings weren't the only ones who participated in the slave trade at all.
Mm,
Yeah,
very,
the
very
reach of
true.
the slave trade always surprises people, right? They assume that slavery ended with the Romans, and then the Vikings bring it back, and then it ends, and then it comes back with the Atlantic slave trade, and then it ends, and none of those things are true. It never ends. Humans are terrible, and humans treat each other badly, and as long as there are greedy people, there will be a slave trade, as long as there's, you know, no justice system to effectively prevent it, honestly. So so some comments that are less controversial than what I just said. Takeda,
I know. I was just thinking that. I was like, I hope the FBI is
Takeda
listening.
says, I'm wondering. I was thinking of Murex snails and Roman Egyptian blue purple. So the difference is that apparently, at least I don't have any evidence of the Chrozophora tinctorius being used for dyeing fabric. Murex is for fabric, not for ink. So they're not really related. And yeah, Egyptian blue I think is lapis lazuli too. I think.
Sounds about right, given the trade routes and stuff.
Yeah, and yes, Susan, you're right. Samarkand had amazingly gorgeous blue-green buildings. The tiles from those came from Persia, as far as I understand it. The tiles they were glazed. Philip, I'd like you to imagine a building with tiles that are glazed using lapis lazuli. Just imagine how beautiful, blue, and shiny that would be. The royal palaces in Seoul all used to be tiled in lapis lazuli tiles that were imported from Persia. So, like, the entire palace used to have this blue roof line.
No, all lies, all lies. It was just full of mud.
Right.
Dirt and mud. It's the Middle Ages,
mud.
just dark ages. Dirt and mud. There's no way that you're just lying to me. All propaganda. Your agenda.
It is.
This is your part of your
It's my feminist Marxist agenda. Yep.
Yeah. All lies. It's all dark. They lived in mud huts. What are you talking about?
So true. Yeah, so that was exciting for me to read. I just, you know, I geek out on things. So, any other questions, anyone, about these cute little, strange little fruit plant weed things? It's, you know, here's the thing, Phil. People underestimate the value of weeds. And most of our best dye stuffs and best medicines come from weeds, not from highly cultivated plants. Yeah.
I know for Raj just joined the conversation with, hey, wait, that's in Afghanistan.
Yep, they do, because that's where lapis lazuli comes from.
We were literally just talking about that, and Raj just
right.
too late.
Yep, Raj, you're absolutely right. We were just saying that lapis lazuli comes from Afghanistan, and that, therefore, I would assume that Afghanistan has lots of tiles that are blue, because they can.
Oh, yeah, I actually didn't even think of that, and that's just common sense when you actually think about it.
Okay, moving on to our next piece of news. What will it be? What will it be? Oh, okay, let's start. Okay, wait, I'll put this back there. Okay, Philip, lead us in, please.
Right, it was actually me, believe it or not. I know you guys would be like, oh, Rachel definitely put this one forward. No, it was actually me. I actually was watching it. So it was Rachel who actually corrected me with this one. I thought this was just put up on YouTube. I thought this was a new video on YouTube, but it was actually a recycled video that one historical group posted up from another one's channel and so on and so forth. So it's actually, technically speaking, an old documentary, but it's reposted up over on their channel. So definitely go over there and have an old look and an old watch of that video. But I thought the video itself was interesting. So I do want to talk about the video itself as well, because there was a lot of stuff in there that I actually kind of disagreed with when it comes down to the roles of women during the medieval period, especially her behavior. Like, don't get me wrong.
It was so first off, we should preface this with saying that this is a docudrama, right? So, and I'm going to say, I'm just going to openly admit, I don't like docudramas. You know, I feel like docudramas blur the already super blurry line between fact and fiction.
Yeah. But on saying that, so there's stuff in the document drama. I was like, like there's no explanation or even explanations to the community to why she's behaving the way she's
Right.
behaving. And don't get me wrong, there's some times where I'm like, well, given the circumstances and add in a few other circumstances, maybe that explains why she behaves the way she behaves. But then there's like, especially coming to the end of it, I'm just like, well, they're just taking the piss now. But at the same time, now this is a double-edged sword. I'm not turning around and saying, hey, look, that document drama is completely wrong. At the same time, myself and Rachel agreed to do this after looking at the comment
Yeah.
section, which
Yep.
was just like, okay, so their interpretation, I kind of was like, questionable. But the interpretation of the comment section, which let's call a spade here, was just full
It
blown
was.
sexist.
It really
I was
was.
like, oh
And
my
there were some
God.
women who drunk in the Kool-Aid in that comment section too. I don't need a
Oh,
feminist
yeah.
white knight to save me. Women are happy being submissive in the Middle Ages. It's like, oh my God, did you really just say that?
Well, is that a bot though?
Right.
You know? Sometimes I'm just like, especially those comments, they say now about 46% of them are
Right.
bots. And I did bite the spelling and stuff. I was like, okay, it sounds like ChatGPT put that one together. But that still leaves 60% of people who have more of as we were saying there, more of a 20th century interpretation of a woman's place in the kitchen instead of doing the administration. Because after I had finished watching the documentary, I was very much like, where are they getting some of this information from? And why are they not elaborating on a lot of stuff that was happening? So just before we even start, we have to ask, okay, so where are these references and sources? Now, don't get me wrong. When it comes down to talking about any of the Scandinavian sources, I am out of my place of interpretation and stuff. However, one of the references was what's her name? Odd the Deep-Minded. Odd the Deep-Minded was one of the references, and she's from Dublin. So I was like, oh, okay, I can actually delve into this one. I actually know what she's talking about because I actually studied this in my second year of university. We had to go off and research Odd the Deep-Minded, who was born in Norway and did make her way over to Dublin. And don't get me wrong, if it was Odd to Deep-Minded, I would fully understand where she was coming from because Odd to Deep-Minded is very unique because she was very much educated in the very, very high standard of the economic and finances that were happening in Dublin in 850. So every single form of movement and trade that was happening from the Scandinavian world going into Dublin and then off into the Iberian Peninsula and into Western Europe, in particular Brittany. That was all happening in Dublin, and Odd the Deep-Minded was educated to do with all of that administration. On top of that as well, she would have also known at the time a woman called a big queen, she's pretty much High Queen of Ireland at the time, which is Land of Mead. That's her name. So Land, she is in charge. I think it's absolutely hilarious because you're reading about her and then she suddenly says that, oh, I'm retiring. And it's like, okay, where she's retiring to? She's going to retire it to her workplace. So she's going to continue doing her job in retirement because now she's a nun. Basically, the only reason she announced that she's retiring is so she can literally just become a nun and doesn't have to marry. That's all she's doing. So she literally retires into her job and continues to do her job, just not being able to marry now.
I mean, I don't blame her. That's a good gig.
Yeah.
Yeah. So hold on. The docudrama is on YouTube. Yeah. What is the channel? Chronicles? What it was?
Yeah, it's Chronicle, yeah.
Right?
So Chronicles over on YouTube posted that up, and it was just so if the docudrama was following Odd the Deep-Minded, I'd have no problems for all the mad stuff she was doing. And in fact, the entire Scandinavian world would go like, oh, well, you're Odd the Deep-Minded from Dublin. That makes perfect sense of why you're behaving the way you're behaving. However, the docudrama, first and foremost, doesn't it brand her as a slave at the very start?
It does. It says literally. It literally opens up with, she was kidnapped as a 10-year-old or an 11-year-old. Her family was slaughtered, and she became the slave wife of this warlord. Right? Like that's what they open with, and so basically implying that then she must still be a slave, right? Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, it depends on the laws. In Ireland, she is given the face, what was it, face honor of her husband. Okay, so if she marries and has kids, she is given a face honor, which makes sense. But I don't know the laws in
right,
Norway, so she could still be a slave for all I know. I don't know. It's outside my field
right.
of expertise. But if it happened in Dublin, and if it was around the circles to do with like the likes of Olaf the White or Ivor the Bonus, that would
Mm.
make sense. But the docudrama doesn't like explain any of that, So that's why I was very, very critical, just like Rachel, about the docudrama. However, if she did get the same status as her
Mm.
husband, that means she's only educated in the administration of her household. So when she goes off and does mad stuff later on, like go to Iceland to open up her own administration and finance, what was it, her own trade
Right.
center, that makes no sense to me because, and you see, one of the references was odd to deep minded, and it's like, okay, so you're basically saying that any woman could become odd to deep minded. No, you still need to go off and study. If you want to be an accountant in this day and age, you need to go off and study accountancy. You can't just suddenly click your fingers and
Right.
go, well, I'm a woman, that means I can become an accountant. No, you can't. That makes
Yeah,
no
not, I mean,
sense.
that's not true of anyone. Like I don't care what gender you are.
Yeah.
You don't get to just do that. You have to study. Yeah, there were, one of the things that I don't like about docudramas is that your average viewer is going to think, and I know this because I've heard people say this, that the conversations are based in history. Like they've taken these
Mm,
conversations from the epics or the sagas or chronicles.
yeah.
And especially in the case of this particular docudrama, they definitely didn't. And
Yeah.
they make her husband seem like the worst kind of toxic masculinity because he also has a sword and an axe, right? and and
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
make it seem like she's just this abused wife, and
Yeah.
I just don't buy any of that for
Mm,
what 10th century woman from that part of, I just don't buy it.
yeah. Well, I could see it. Like it is the 10th century, as you said there, it is the 10th century and it is the period of warlords and all that stuff. So it does make sense that she does it, given the circumstances that the scenario they put her in, which is her husband is a warlord. She was previously a slave who is now the wife to this warlord, and he's going around doing warlord things, which falls into the category of toxic masculinity, depending on your interpretation of things. But it kind of fits in with the era and stuff. So we do have accounts of people trying to escape their husbands through various reasons, etc., etc. But then the scenario from there kind of, to me, makes absolutely no sense of why she then got it in her head of, oh, wait, I know, I was talking to so and so, and he said there's plenty of land in Iceland. I could open up a
Right.
trade port in Iceland.
Yeah.
What? How are you doing this? That makes no sense to me. Like, who's going off and teaching you this economic and finance? Like, that makes no sense to me. And the reference is like Odd the Deep Minded. And I'm like, but Odd the Deep Minded was educated in Dublin in an era where you have got the likes of Land the Deep Mind. What was it? I'm getting mixed up these names up. Land of Mead, who is in Clonmacnoise, who was doing all this in the centre of Ireland. Do you know? So the connection, her aide, the deep minded, was in the centre of this, having a full on education, who was also connected with some of the greatest people to do economic and finance at the bloody time. So, of course, she was going to be absolutely amazing. Of course, when she got it in her head of, do you know what? I'll risk it for a
I'll
biscuit.
risk
I'll
it for a
immigrate from Dublin
biscuit.
to Iceland. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'll risk it for a biscuit. Okay, it might fail, but after the death of my husband, Olaf the White, I have nothing to lose here in Dublin. So I'm going to immigrate off to Iceland, open up a trade port, and see if I can actually pull it off. And lo and behold, she does. Why? Because she has a full plan, even in Dublin. The sagas and everything highlight the fact that she had gone off, purposely hired enough slaves and freed them, by the way. Everyone under her was previously a male and female slave that she bought all of them, brought them to Iceland, and trained them all up. So it's not even like she got a bunch of random slaves. They're all slaves that had crafting skills. She did this entire plan and format inside of Dublin before immigrating over to Iceland. Like she had an entire plan of doing this, but this is the reason why I had a huge problem with the documentary, because it made it look like any woman, because of your gender, you can just go off and just open up your business. Don't worry about doing any fucking 10-step plan of, setting up a business or anything. Just do what you want. You're a woman, I think that's what it was kind of, screaming at. So where I do disagree with the comment section, which is, full on sexist
Really?
comments that definitely did have a kind of 20th century interpretation of, well, a woman's place is in the kitchen and she shouldn't know any better. At the same time, you're still dealing with 10th century Norway and Iceland, which does believe that women are involved in the administration, but at the same time, you're still in your class. Like, if she was of a noble class, I would say, okay, maybe she's somewhat educated to understand how to open up a trade port, but she's not going to, unless she's got that education, especially coming from a slave
Well,
background.
she didn't.
Like, who the hell's teaching her all
she didn't
this?
come from a slave background, though. She was a chieftain's daughter, right? But her home was raided when she was 11. Like they were.
Yeah.
And so she was kidnapped. So she's not like she does come from an upper class background, which is why she became the warlord's wife, right? Like, he wasn't going to just make anyone his wife. So she is definitely not. She's not some street urchin who makes good. So I mean, I have no problem with any of that. It's just the whole, I feel like the dramatization was just over drama. I think it was too much drama, and I don't think the sources bear out the level of drama that they've included it. And also, a lot of the problem is that a lot of the sagas that document all of this so-called history post-date the events by several hundred years. So, how accurate are the sagas in terms of what actually happened? And I really wish they would have addressed that more in the docu parts of the docudrama, that they had actually talked about, well, these sources say blah, 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 but, they post-date the events by such and such. Or if they'd actually said, actually, we have some contemporary sources from her lifetime that have somehow miraculously survived, and they tell us this. But there's none of that. So it's even blurring the lines of real history even more, which is, for me, irritating. And makes it unenjoyable to watch. Also, the dubbing made it really unenjoyable to watch.
Well, actually, it's funny you say that, because my wife had the same problem as well. She found the dubbing very annoying as well. But, it is a Danish group. Well, the clothing was funny at times as well, because it looked like it was slightly a Danish Viking group, or at least a Norwegian Viking group. But sometimes the clothing was wild in it, and especially the chieftain himself. Like, he really just couldn't be asked. He went down to the local LARP group and just picked up their kit and just rocked up for the day of filming and stuff. His kit was all over the place. There was a few few people's kits in there, which was all right, but the majority of them, it was like they just went down. And no offense again to anyone who does LARP, but that's what it looked like. It looked like it came from a LARP event rather than anything to do with history.
I can't argue with that. Yeah, unfortunately. Oh, chicken on biscuits. Thank you. Appreciate you. So, for those who are wondering what we're talking about, this is the documentary. Oh, and by the way, they changed the title. In response to the comments. What was life really like for Viking women? That's what it now is labeled as.
Which makes more sense, because that title made absolute sense.
So a lot of the comments were in reaction to that, and I can't blame them. She did not discover Iceland. And literally, they say in the thing, they refer to Iceland as being an extant and known, entity. So it was a clickbait title. I mean, it was 100%. Let's be honest. The words Viking, woman, and discovered automatically are clickbait. So, that's true. She didn't discover it. She definitely did not discover it. But she did have a big impact on helping settle it, and turning it into what Iceland. I mean, really contributing to what Iceland is now, even to a certain degree. So, I think some of the criticism wasn't wrong, but like you said, holy poop. The first comment with, I don't know what it is with Chronicle doing all this revisionist history lately. Women just didn't have this role in history, right? They just sat in the kitchen and twiddled their thumbs and maybe occasionally made their husband some soup while making sure their makeup was perfect. I don't know. But
it it annoys the crap out of me, because then they're the same kind of people that turn around to me and says, "Oh, you're just part of this whole woke thing," and it's like, no, I'm not denying, and it's the
Yeah.
same with you, Rachel. We're not denying gender roles
Yep.
didn't exist. We're denying your 20th century interpretation of a woman's
Yep.
places in the kitchen. It's doing the
Yep.
administration, not the
Yep.
bloody kitchen. Like, Jesus Christ, this whole thing of a wife, big smiley face on top of her, doing what was it, the dishes and stuff, while she's, big blonde hair, blue eyes. That's a 20th century
Yeah.
interpretation. The trad wife, as
Yeah.
it's called. Women, me and the wife were talking about this last night. Women of the the entire medieval period would have been built like battle tanks. They would have been big and muscly. Like, they would not be the little delicate things that you have in the 20th century. Why? Because women had to do a whole load of manual labor work. They have to pick up boxes. They have to do all the churning of the butter. The amount of men I know at this day and age that could not pick up half of the weight that women back then could pick up, or even do the churning of the butter. I could imagine a man who spends his entire day, and let's be honest, if he spends the whole day in front of a computer doing administration work, and then is expected to do churning of the butter, he can't do it.
He would run out of breath.
And yet, yeah, exactly. And yet, women of the medieval period were expected to not just do the sewing, just doing all the other bits and bobs, but doing all the churning of the butter.
Yeah, and I think absolutely. And not just that, like, even, and then someone will come at me with, "Oh, well, but not the noble women." I'm like, well, medieval noble women are not end of the Kingdom of France noble women, right? We're not talking about Baroque noble women. We're talking about noble women who still have to do a lot of very manual things. Okay, maybe they're not carrying chests up 4 flights of castle stairs, granted. But, they are still going up and down stairs, walking the hell all over the place all the time to manage this and this and this and that. They are absolutely often having to, even noble women are still doing things like spinning and textile work. So they're not sitting on their duffs all day. They're barely ever sitting, in fact. So yeah.
Well, it depends on as you point out like 1,000 times, it depends on the location and the era that we're talking about. Because you take, for example, the High Middle Ages, the era of Henry II, and the big massive clash that is Eleanor of Aquitaine inside of the French court. Her behavior is completely vile to the men of Paris. And yet, in the same realm of France, her behavior is completely, if not encouraged, in the likes of the Iberian Peninsula and her own realm of Aquitaine. So her behavior is completely acceptable. And in fact, the Normans of Normandy think her behavior is charming. They love the way she behaves. Henry II is encouraged by the men of Normandy and other men within his own court, including the English, to go off and marry her. She's the perfect prime of what a woman should be. Do not accept these weak, fragile men. Go off and marry yourself a man who's pure masculine. And if he doesn't please you, run away with another man. That's not acceptable with the men of Paris, but it is acceptable with the men of Aquitaine, the Iberian Peninsula. Englishmen and even Irishmen think this behavior is completely acceptable, and it's encouraged in those areas.
So Takeda's comment is not a 60-pound wood chest, but they were taking 30-pound baskets of bedclothes and laundry up and down twice a day. Yeah, but not noble women. Noble women. I'm talking about noble women. Obviously, every other woman in medieval society was deeply involved in manual labor. So they definitely, like Yuki said, or you, it was Yuki's words or yours, built like a battle axe, right? They would have had to be. Laundresses, doing laundry in the Middle Ages is one hell of a physical work. Like, they didn't need gym memberships. No one needed a gym membership in the Middle Ages. I think that says it all. And it's not because of famine, right? They didn't.
There's videos from the 19th century Victorian Empire of it's a mother with her children, and the two of them are flying up and down a tree like they're monkeys, and the son falls from the top of the tree and he just jumps back on his feet again and runs around the place. There's another video as well from the 19th century Victorian Empire of a car crashing into the side of the wall, and your man goes flying into the air, and everybody suddenly jumps it's like they jump out of character and run over to him like monkeys. It's weird. And they run over to a pig. They literally literally just pick him up, throw him back onto his feet again, and brush him down. And then everybody just gets back into character again. And I remember watching this going, what? No wonder they have an idea of civilized cities and uncivilized countryside. If they're behaving how we would see today, like monkey, you know, the way they move and run up trees and stuff. And on top of that, there's still, even in America today, there are what they call, you know, they're very religious people, you know, what they call
the Amish?
The Amish. If you look at the Amish, they will actually, there's many of them that live in the rural areas, can actually fly up and down trees like they're monkeys of some sort, and actually can jump between the trees, which is a skill we don't have. If you're living in the civilized areas of your society, we can't do that. Afghanistan's another good example of that. I seen men from Afghanistan flying between trees, and I was thinking, geez, they're so like fit with their feet and stuff. That's what you should naturally be able to do. And that produces women who are very masculine, you know, sorry, not masculine, muscular. They're very, very muscular. So when people are looking at nice, fragile women, they're not talking about our modern fragile women. In fact, if a man from the medieval period saw me, he would think I was a woman, you know, even with my beard and stuff, he'd be very confused. He'd be like, why are you so soft?
You so
you know,
soft?
You're very soft. Yeah. He would categorize me as a woman, you know, because compared to him, who's very thick, very strong, he would definitely, the majority of men today, very soft.
Goodness. Yeah,
you know?
no, I can't argue with that. Cannot argue with that at all. So yeah, this documentary, this docudrama, it's definitely not a documentary. I would say, if you don't mind the dubbing, it's worth a watch. At the very least, it will expose a lot of people to a piece of history with which they're no doubt unfamiliar, especially in the United States. Most people in the United States have zero clue about anything involving Scandinavia, and certainly have no clue about Iceland or Greenland in terms of European colonization. So I think from that perspective, it's valuable, but it's also very important that people not take everything that they say or present as being 100% based on things that actually happened.
I would definitely question it, and from there, definitely look into actual Norse and Icelandic sagas and stuff. It does have the feel of war bands, so on and so forth. But the problem I have is that then she goes off and does a lot of mad stuff, and it's very questionable. And then even reading the sources, I'm like, yeah, but the sources explain why she's behaving the way she's behaving or doing what she's able to do. This documentary, I don't think it actually explains why she's doing what she's doing or even behaving, because I don't want to sound bad or anything, but if she behaved the way she behaved in the documentary without the explanations, quite literally in both the Icelandic saga and the Norse saga, there are women that behave like that, and they're referred to as that word is gone over my head, mad. Not she-wolf. Well, she-wolves is more high medieval period, from my knowledge. In Norway and Iceland, they're kind of hysterical. That's the word. It's a play on word, hysterical. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, they're mad. Yeah, but not in Ireland. In Ireland, it's more complicated in Ireland. Don't get me wrong. There are times when people act somewhat hysterical, but in Ireland, women, because you have monastic settlements and you have urban cities and stuff where women are heavily involved with the administration of finances in those areas, women could behave more from, they could easily set up businesses. In fact, if you read the likes of the Fin Cycle and stuff, it's encouraged for women to set up businesses around. We were literally started off this thing with it's encouraged for women to set up businesses around the military. So they will literally set up buildings and stuff for cattle raiders to go to wash, have services done, various bits and bobs done, and that's encouraged for women to do that inside of Irish society. So where the Brehon laws still don't give women the same rights that we have today, it does encourage women to behave different to what you see in Norway and Iceland. So there's a lot of stuff that I'd seen that documentary, and I would say to myself, well, if you were in Ireland and you had that education as well, you'd be able to get away with that kind of stuff. But from my understanding of reading the Norse and Icelandic sagas, she would be branded as, somewhat hysterical, depending on the language and the translation of it. But, she'd be mad, because you can see women who get involved with blood feuds and stuff are referred to by the community as a whole as hysterical, because her behavior, her leaving her husband like that and taking the child and stuff, that's, according to Icelandic behavior, that's sort of hysterical. Like, you're wrecking up that community because you just don't like your husband. And that's the way that they would view it. But in Ireland, it's debatable, because first and foremost, your community is number one. You just randomly leaving and wrecking up your community would destroy it. But I thought it was interesting that that particular documentary actually referenced Aud the Deep-Minded, who is from Dublin. The reason why she's able to leave Dublin is because her husband is dead. That's why she gets away
She's
with
free,
that.
basically.
Her husband's not passed away in that documentary, so there's no explanation to why she's just allowed to leave.
They kind of hint at it, because he brings back this other slave, right, and says, she's basically my new bedmate now, so you've been replaced. So there's, I mean, but again, like, it's implied, but it's not outright stated. And once and again, they never talk about the sources, right? They don't really talk about the sources, even when they're interviewing the professor, the historians, right? The historians say things, but they don't say, as mentioned in the such and such saga, she is recorded as doing blah blah blah, right? I really wish they would state it that way, so that it also makes it clear to the viewer, the maybe underinformed viewer, that what you're seeing presented here is conjectural, or if it's not, right? Is it conjectural? Is it not? Let us know. Tell us what the sources are. So.
Because James is bringing up some very, very important, bits and bobs inside there, and I fully agree with everything that James is saying, because, like, he's not passed away, he's alive, and it's one thing to have a concubine, but if you're the head, you see, and the documentary doesn't explain that, is that she is the head of she's meant to be the wife, she is the head of that household, she's the head of the administration. So I don't blame the historians or the archaeologists. I just blame the script writers or whoever put that together, because it doesn't explain. It has no understanding of finance and administration. That's what my biggest annoyance is because she basically leaves. If we were to look at it from a modern perspective, she leaves her business, which is her household, and just walks away from it, which you're not allowed to do. You can't just walk away from something you're running and then go, do you know what? I'm going to set up a port business, a very successful port business in Iceland. I'm just going to randomly do it. It makes sense in the actual reference, which is Aud the Deep-Minded, which her husband's passed away, and there's too much competition in Dublin. That's her thing. Like, she's like, okay, well, myself and the reason why there's too much competition is because Ivor the Boneless is pretty much dominating the administration at the time, and she was a part of the whole Fingal camp and a whole load of politics and stuff. And she's like, okay, I'm not going to cut off and burn. Like, and this is the thing. In the documentary, she just cuts off and burns everything, all of her connections with Norway and stuff, because she just leaves her husband. That doesn't happen in, in the actual reference of Aud the Deep-Minded. She doesn't go off and make enemies with Dublin. Why would she? She can make so much money. The men of Dublin and women know that there's so much money to make with more trade in Iceland. So she just, organizes herself, and she just leaves. She goes up to, the Orkneys for a wee bit, because she has more friends and allies up there. And then eventually she makes her way up to Iceland, and she opens up that port business and connects herself over to Dublin, and she becomes insanely rich very, very fast because she is so highly educated with economics and finance, and trade.
Yeah, overall, I would say it's not a good documentary, because it's not a documentary. It's and it's an okay docudrama, but definitely don't go and take any university entrance exams based on the information it presents. I think that would be my thing. But I think we'll definitely have to look at some other of these documentaries and whatnot that are coming out on YouTube and give our feedback on it, because there's a lot these days, right?
Yeah, there is so much. And even to talk about various debates and arguments that are kicking off on YouTube, I kind of want to have more of that going on. Still, don't worry and don't panic. I'm still going to be covering books and archaeological finds, but I do like to talk about the, what's it called? All the mad stuff that's going on.
Yeah, the comments are always a shit show, everyone. Often a shit show.
Mm.
On my community wall, I've managed to keep it. I've curated it, although I don't have to do much curation, thankfully, on my wall. Most of my people, or the people who take the time to leave comments, are being authentic and genuine and not complete assholes. But Philip, you get some amazing comments under your videos. Dear God, man.
These days, God, it's a lot of fucking 20th century references as well. What I was arguing about was even like last week, it was like, oh, you cover too much Viking history. And what was it called? I covered the E-Nail this week, and not a single, these people didn't even bloody pop up. I was like, okay, I'm now uncovering Irish history. Maybe you should come in and have a little chat with me and stuff. And when they do come into it, they have no clue who are the Enel, who are the Eamers, who are the Onakta. Oh no, I have plenty of time to talk about Irish history from a nationalist perspective of us Irish people are going to wipe out the Vikings and all this kind of garbage. But when it comes down to having an actual conversation about who are the Enel, what was life like for the Enel? Where are they now, huh? Where are they? Jesus Christ, you know?
Nationalism ruins history. It really does. It just does.
Well, don't get me wrong. I like the banter of it, and I like the introduction into it. But it's when you completely apply nationalism into Viking Age Ireland, for example, and have this idea that Brian Brew, the Emperor of the Gaels, was flying the Irish tricolour and fighting the Vikings in Dublin. The Vikings in Dublin with their big Norwegian
wearing a
flag
saffron kilt. Wearing a saffron kilt.
Yes, they all had that. Yeah. The Irish all had saffron kilts on it. This kind of madness, I'm just like, oh, Jesus Christ, stop. This is not early medieval Ireland. Early medieval Ireland is all about war bands and all that sort of stuff. It is not about united nationalism. Even the way people come into the comment section, with the comment section early on about your man of, why didn't the Irish ever unite? Yeah, they should have united and flown the bloody tricolour. Why didn't they do that? I can't understand either, you know? Why didn't they understand nationalism like the English do?
Exactly. Because, definitely in the 6th century, the English were also nationalistic. It was totally England. Yeah. The 6th century.
Yeah. Every time they talk about Ethelstan.
Oh my God, Ethelstan.
I'm not going to bitch about other. Okay, I'm not going to bitch about other historians because that will bring me into the argument with other historians and academics who do have agendas. You know. Of course, I'm the one with the agenda because I'm looking to undermine their interpretation. I'm the one with the agenda, you know, not the historians and academics who are applying modern English interpretation into their work because somebody wants an extra bit of money in their bank account.
Yeah. Takeda says he'd like to see more content like this, where there's discussion between two experts who are at least dedicated and educated. And interest in the in-depth details in another docudrama. Yeah, Takeda, I hate docudramas so much. I wish we could go back to them making just regular old documentaries, but that doesn't seem to be where the money is these days. It's these docudramas that, bombastic music, the whole 9 yards.
Oh, James, I'm not talking about you. James, I know for at least when you come into the comment section, and that's the same with a good chunk of people, when they come into the comment section, they have enough common sense to know that the early medieval period is a period of war bands. They have no understanding in Irish nationalism. They don't. And yet there's so many people out there that think and assume that Brian Brew was flying the Irish nationalist flag, and he was the one that united Ireland, and finally we have nationalism. That's literally how people, paint the medieval period. It's not like Brian Brew had no idea what the hell Irish nationalism was. People paint him like he was hanging around with Michael Collins and Patrick Pearse, and I'm like, Jesus Christ!
He was a member of Sinn Féin, don't you know?
Exactly. That's the way. Like, he was the founding father of Sinn Féin, Brian Brew's base, and it's like he had no understanding. All he understood was that this is my wife, this is my ring fort, and this guy, well, he won't give me tribute, so I'm going to burn down his ring fort and get my tribute. That's literally his understanding of the world.
Now, Philip, he was a Chieftains fan, and he loved you too, and he was a member of Sinn Féin. and,
That's
and he
what you think
drank
it is,
Guinness.
I stop. It's wild.
Oh my
But don't
god.
get me wrong, I'm not a saint. I played the Nationals, tune every once in a while. Somebody turned around once and says, "It's funny how they keep wearing tartan," and I'm like, "Well, it's not like I'm trying to sell something."
Yeah.
I will confess I do put tartan in a lot, and the reason why somebody said to me the other day they keep dressing up as Gallo Glass and Curran of the Pacific era, and people keep thinking he's like from the Lord of the Rings or something, and I'm like, well, I kind of cheat. I put on tartan and I like alter my clothing a wee bit so they know, oh well, he's Irish, and I do manipulate. I'm not going to turn around and says, oh, I'm a complete saint. In fact, I encourage other people to kind of just manipulate your clothing a little bit so you don't get the same stupid question over and over again of why do you look like a hobbit?
Oh,
You don't look Irish. Why don't you look like a
right. Yeah.
Celt?
Why are you
You
wearing
know,
clothes? Why aren't you covered in blue paint?
yeah. So, just adding a bit of tartan and stuff in
Oh
there,
my god.
let's go
Oh
a
my
bit,
god.
far like.
Oh goodness. Okay. Let's move away from the tartan topic. I don't want to dispel that again today. I've been I've been talking about tartans for so long. I'm dreaming in tartan. Like everyone is in tartan in my dreams. They have tartan skin. The wallpaper is tartan. Can you James would like a
wait,
tin of tartan paint.
wait, Wait until 5 years from now, Rachel, when you have to go off and do your
Oh
PhD in
gosh.
tartan, and you think it's finished. You think it's going to be finished soon. Wait,
Oh
wait
my
until five
god.
years from now when you get
Like
pushed ahead. Someone hears one of your videos and is like, "I'll give her grant money to do a PhD in tartan."
no. Actually, if someone gave me grant money, I would do that. But they're probably going to not like the
Yeah.
conclusions I come to. But that's okay. Woo, okay, on that
Right.
note, our last topic, and this one is really interesting because people have been asking me in my live streams about medieval medicine. And lo and behold, once again, medieval living history meets science, new medieval medical remedy research is being conducted. So scientists, medical researchers are actually looking at medieval medicinal manuals and recipes for treatments, and they're specifically looking for ways, treatments that are actually effective and scientifically provably effective. So they're actually, they're investigating these remedies in terms of their antimicrobial properties, their anti-inflammatory properties, and their effect on promoting the immune system, immunomodulatory properties. And what they've recently found is that their stinging nettle makes a huge, and what you see there in the center, that is actually a 15th century depiction of stinging nettle. Have you ever run into stinging nettle, Philip? Just the plant? It's
Yeah, it's
nasty, right?
nasty.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's nasty.
America, we don't have stinging nettle in the US, at least I don't. Yeah, I've never
What?
encountered it in the US. We have worse. We've got poisons, ivy, oak, and sumac, which is way, way worse.
Oh well,
Way, way worse.
yeah.
But stinging nettle was apparently it was very common in medieval Europe, and it was used in a lot of different remedies. And so,
Mm.
these scientists are thinking, okay, it's used in a lot of different remedies. Why? Was it actually effective? So they actually recreated some of the remedies as described. And there's one remedy from a hunting manual from the 15th century that provides a dog bite treatment recipe. Because if you're
Oh, wow.
hunting in the 15th century, you're using dogs. And apparently these dogs were mean
Mm.
bastards and they would turn on you sometimes. And these
Yeah.
are not your friendly little golden retrievers who just sort of sit there, wag their tail, and want you to pet them. No, no, no. And so this remedy involves. So, have you ever been bitten by a dog?
Lucky for me, I haven't, but
Yeah,
everyone
I
else
have.
has.
I
It's
had a hole
nasty. It
ripped out
is.
of my right arm when I was an 8-year-old child by a nasty, yeah, by an all the
Jesus.
way to the bone. If you've ever seen your bone from the
Oh,
outside with the blood filling up through the wound like a wine glass, it was a very interesting experience for me.
oh,
Yeah, and people
nasty.
wonder why dogs are not my animal of choice.
Okay, now I understand.
So
I can understand why that
so
would be a
now I'm
trauma.
wondering if I'd had this remedy, if the massive scar I now have on my arm, if I can actually show you. Yeah, I can actually. Yeah, that scar right there. Yeah, I wonder if I wouldn't actually have that scar, because the remedy is actually to take stinging nettle and grind it with vinegar and salt, and then
Okay.
put that on the wound. It says for up to 9 days. Okay,
Okay.
so vinegar is going to feel real special in a wound, in an open wound. You've probably, yeah,
Yeah,
have you gotten
imagine.
just like vinegar in a paper cut accidentally? You want to just cut your finger off.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
It's
real
nasty.
nasty. So they actually took this remedy, they made it, and then they tested it in a lab in petri dishes on various microbial populations, bacteria, viruses, etc. So, and they also made just ground up nettle so they could compare the two. So what they found is very interesting. The nettle does not have any antimicrobial properties, none, zero, zilch, no impact on microbes, no impact on bacteria. But the leaf of the nettle is composed in such a way that it acts like a sponge. And so literally it becomes a vector to deliver the vinegar effectively through the entire wound and to hold it there. Because if you just pour vinegar over it, then the vinegar will briefly be in contact, but then it will run out. But you're supposed to make a plaster out of this. You make this compound and then you pack the wound, and the nettle holds the vinegar against in the wound and the nettle delivers the vinegar and therefore keeps the wound sterile, so the wound can actually heal. And so what they're realizing is that medieval recipes, medicinal recipes, are much more sophisticated than we imagined. And that we have to actually look at it as a whole. We can't look at it as, well, it's the vinegar or it's the stinging nettle. No. They work together. And it's important the way they work, because the nettle provides a very specific kind of material that also then apparently doesn't actually cause problems in the wound itself, right? So it's not like if you put synthetic sponge bits into the hole in your arm that's been created by this mean, nasty hunting dog, and then you have to somehow remove those synthetic bits, right? No, the nettle breaks down in your body and it just gets reabsorbed. So apparently, they also found out that nettle has anti-inflammatory properties if it is prepared as it is in the medieval recipes in either butter or olive oil. Yeah, because the fats, the butter, the fatty acids in the butter and the olive oil draw out the anti-inflammatory compounds. So it's sort of like you can't actually really access and properly have those anti-inflammatory compounds absorb into your skin without the fat. So now they're looking at nettle as a treatment for things like arthritis, right? A very affordable, not toxic treatment for arthritis that can, just absorb into your skin thanks to the fat, right? Which will help it cross that barrier. And there's even one treatment called Bald's eye salve, which apparently, so it's a 10th century treatment, I think. And it's, don't quote me on the 10th century part, but it's a medieval treatment. Apparently it was supposed to be for eye conditions, but it apparently, this might scare you a little bit. It kills MRSA in a lab environment. Yeah.
Whoa.
So, wow. Especially in an era of antibiotic resistance, they're really trying to find treatments that are antibiotic in a very different way, because our current style of antibiotics has created these superbugs, and we're almost at the point where we can't defeat them anymore. So this is why researchers are starting to go back to the old ways. And see if there's a way to save humanity from itself at this point. So yeah, stinging nettle for the win. How cool is that?
It's wild, because we started this chat up early on by saying the claims of revisionist history, you're doing revisionist history and all that stuff. And it's like, well, we kind of have to know, if we need to survive, we need to go back over all the original sources and do as exactly we were saying, have the agenda of doing revisionist history so we can find the antidotes to a lot of these problems, which are reoccurring back up, especially when the medicine we're using, the bacteria is starting to evolve around it, causing us to become sick regardless of how much medication that we're putting on, that we now have to do, as, a lot of people who are accusing us of doing agenda revisionist history, we have to do it anyway,
Right. Yeah, exactly. So Takeda has a great question, and it's one that this is a topic I talk about often in my cooking classes. A lot of you don't know I teach cooking professionally. Anyway, Takeda says, is that why when I drink nettle tea with cream, that my psoriatic arthritis hurts less than when I have it with lemon? Yes. So everyone, the reason that you need to have fat in your diet and why the low-fat diet is a scam and bad for you is that many micronutrients are only fat soluble and can only be absorbed into the body in the presence of fat. So Takeda, I'm absolutely confident that that is true. So science is BS, nature for the win. No. Science, no.
Burn the labs, destroy the labs.
That is not the takeaway here.
Kill the scientists.
It's definitely not the takeaway at all. Science, no.
We need to go back to the healers and the pagan witches. Neo-paganism, burn the science labs. That's what we're saying at the end of this.
No, absolutely not. No, we need, no. It is scientists who've discovered this, right? And it's scientists who figured out how this works and why it works.
I don't know what you're talking about, Rachel. Burn the scientists.
Burn the scientists, yeah. Those university elites, what do they really know? Oh, wait, we're university elites. Damn it.
What? I'm a neo-pagan. I believe in getting the old, what was it called? Getting the old healers and witches back again. Burn the Christians. Burn the scientists.
Oh my God, no, definitely not. I mean, but and there's a difference between synthetic chemicals and naturally occurring chemicals, right? And so and no one, and you'll notice I specifically said, I think I'd rather put, stinging nettle in my wound than these synthetic sponges that they're developing in these chemical plants like by DuPont. But still, this is really important, everyone. Science is the way forward, and humans have been pursuing science since we could walk, honestly, in one way or the other.
Science and nature is kind of one thing anyway. It's just the understanding of the world around you. So
exactly, the natural. They used to call it the natural sciences, right? Yeah. Like that's what it was called back. The natural philosophy. That's what it was called in the Middle Ages. It was referred to as natural philosophy.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't get me wrong. If you're joking, like it looks like a joke, to be honest with you. That's why I kind of jumped in there. But if you're not joking, no, science and nature are kind of one. It's the understanding of the world around it. The scientists didn't discover it. You must be joking. Science, nature, one thing. It's the understanding of the world around you. I don't know. Is that not common sense?
Yeah.
What school
well,
did you go to?
The question is, the scientists didn't discover it was already there. No, it was not already there. It's scientists who discovered the compounds working together, right? Nature didn't put the vinegar and the stinging nettle together. That is not what nature did. It's science that did that. I will die on that hill.
Oh yeah, someone else as well. I got a fresh wave of people who've subscribed and they can finally comment now. By the looks of it, because you have to wait a certain period of time, so they're not bots. These are people just having the banter. But somebody did actually ask quite an interesting one of, and this is gonna really wreck up your head, Rachel, but I found it interesting anyway. Why are you dressed like it's the 1600s?
I'm not. I'm dressed like it's the 1400s because I focus on the 15th century, and this is the medieval buzz, and we're talking about a lot of 15th century stuff. Also, the algorithm prefers it when I dress this way.
No, if I couldn't, right. 2 reasons why I'm not dressed up. Actually, I would be dressed up too, to be quite honest with you. And the 2 reasons, because I love my medieval clothing so much, but the 2 reasons why I'm not in medieval clothing right now is first and foremost,
You don't have it with you?
yeah, it's over in Ireland. That's where it's not. And secondly, me and Rachel have actually, because people keep asking me, why are you not in medieval clothing? And at some stage, when I'm actually squared away, I'll ask Rachel to square away something, or me and Rachel will come up with something for me to wear, so I don't look like especially with this on, like a complete dork or something. And I get even more dorky and just enjoy medieval history. So myself and Rachel will come up with something at some stage to square me away, because I look like it's me who looks like the freaking weirdo with just the shirt on doing medieval history, you know?
Yeah. Yep.
So what's your outfit based on? Because I know you said it's actually the 1400s. What's it actually based on?
So this is so what I'm wearing right now, you can only see me from my waist up, but whatever. There's a dress below here that goes all the way to the ground. If you go to my YouTube channel, The Creative Contessa, you can see lots of every medieval sewing party, every medieval story time over the last lots of months. You can see me actually getting dressed in this if you want to see what that process is. But basically, this is what's called a kirtle in English from the 15th century, or it's called a cotte in French. It would be called a gamora in Italian, in the northern Italian city-states. And it's made of wool. And I've got the linen smock on underneath, and then I have my kerchief, my couvre-chef on top. And basically, I am wearing the very, very casual at-home underlayers that a noblewoman would have worn just sort of in the privacy of her own home. If I were to go out, I'd have to put another dress over top of this, actually.
Yeah.
But peasants who were working in the fields would wear this layer. Women who were doing manual labor, or sort of dirty work, like potters, female potters would have worn this, or if they were working in the dairy, they would have worn this. But 15th century, so roughly you see this short sleeve kirtle like this for the first time in the 1410s. The peasants working in the field in the Très Riche de Jean Duc de Berry, the very beautiful hours of John of Berry, very, 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 the most famous artwork in the Middle Ages, honestly. And then you continue to see the short sleeve kirtle all the way up to like the 1480s is the last time you kind of see it depicted. So it's kind of, this is the workhorse of women's dress garments in the Middle Ages. This is the foundational layers, and then something else would go over top of this if I were to go outside. So yeah.
I was thinking that, all right, because when we look into early medieval Ireland, for example, and it talks about the assembly and it talks about everyone being done up like dolls and stuff, I did think that perhaps maybe there's a different outfit for when they're just in the farmstead ring fort, and then when they go to the assemblies that they would put on a completely different outfit. But now, as you pointed out there, in the 15th century, we do actually have noble women that had clothing for inside of their home, which are wearing now. And then when they went to certain events and stuff, would have changed outfits and stuff depending on the scenario.
Yeah. And I always say this is noble women casual wear. It's like the Gucci. This is the Gucci sweatsuit of the 15th century for a noblewoman. Especially if I'd made it. So noble women would have this layer made out of things like, also in addition to wool, silk cloth of gold, silk velvet, silk damask. So like, I guess that's probably more the Gucci sweatsuit of the 15th century now that I think about it. This is just the Lululemon of the 15th century. Yeah. Yeah, I thought the Amish didn't use phones. Yeah, the Amish also don't show their cleavage and collarbones or their neck or pretty curly hair.
Does it not depend on the Amish group though? Because aren't they more relaxed depending on which group they're in?
Oh, you're talking about the Mennonites. They're not Amish.
I have no clue. Yeah.
No, I'm from, like Takeda, I'm from Amish country. So I actually have my dad, where I grew up, my dad still lives in that house. He actually still has Mennonite neighbors. So we had Mennonite neighbors growing up. So I actually went to Bible school, summer school with them. They were really cool. But the Amish are much stricter. Yeah, the Amish, it's all about modesty for men and women. So you've got collars up to here. No fancy anything, not colors. It's all about modesty and fun. Yeah.
Kicked out in a few hours.
Yeah. Takeda, Lululemon of the 15th century quote of the day. Yeah. So yeah, that's the news. That is the medical news. I'm so excited that researchers are finally recognizing the value in the knowledge of our ancestors, and that instead of just saying we're the best because we're the latest, assuming that maybe some of our ancestors may have, hear me out on this, known more than we do. Um,
Which just proves, as the comment section pointed out, that in fact the scientists were wrong, and we need to now go out and burn the science labs and the scientists. You know, it ends up the witches and the neo pagans, they're completely correct, and we need to now burn the scientists. You heard it
yeah,
first.
that is totally the right takeaway. I cannot argue with your pure logic. Let me
Yeah,
see. The
that's
question
it.
is, would you ever wear a yellow Lena? The gnome, are you talking to me or are you talking to Philip?
I have a yellow lane back in Ireland. It's class. It's based off of, what was it called, 16th century ish. Well, it is now. But instead of having, everyone asks me about the big cuffs and stuff. I don't, because my original plan was to have a gallo glass style Lena. So I wanted to be able to take riveted mail on and off really, really easy. And if you look at the what's it called, the actual image of a gallo glass, there's a drawing by a German. A German did a drawing of a gallo glass, and in it, he's got this Lena that's very tight fitting to the body.
Yeah, I've
And
seen it.
so the
Yeah.
reason for it is so I can take my riveted mail on and off, which, by the way, is another thing I need. Do you know what? I need to start poking and prodding other medievalists and see if they will sponsor our videos, because riveted mail is another one I'd love to get a hold of. If somebody could send me riveted mail, that'd be class. Because I'm also missing riveted mail as well.
Unfortunately, all the riveted mail makers these days, most of them are in India.
Okay.
So
India,
or Pakistan, yeah, because you don't want to pay what it would cost to pay a European to make riveted mail. It would be
right.
the price would be beyond belief. Yeah. Okay, well that is all our news. Do we miss any comments or questions that need addressing, Philip?
No, I think that's pretty much it. Everyone's just kind of having old banter and stuff in the comment section. Trying to have a look there. No, that's pretty much it.
But actually, I didn't answer the question about Lena from my perspective. So if I were to so here's the thing, everyone. The documentation for the yellow, specifically a yellow Lena, you don't really start seeing lots of evidence of that until the 15th century, but it's not a uniform thing that all women are wearing. And most of the evidence, it becomes really popular or very commented on anyway in the 16th century. So before that, it seems the Lena is nearly always described as being bright or gleaming, but it doesn't necessarily mean it was yellow. So would I wear it? Yes, but because of the way women were dressing in Ireland in the 15th century, you would barely be able to see it. So it wouldn't matter. Because Lena, for those who don't know, Lena just means undershirt. It means smock. It means tunic. And it's the layer that you wear against your skin, and it's derived from linum, Latin for linen, because they were made out of linen originally and mostly. So it's the layer that goes against your skin. It's your undershirt, basically. So would I wear a yellow one? I mean, maybe, but it wouldn't matter, because in the 15th century, the kinds of clothes Irish women were wearing, you wouldn't have really seen it.
Lena, what's a Lena? Lena is literally the direct translation is an under tunic.
Yeah.
But then going into the 16th century, there's a big deal made about it because it's mixed with saffron. And so it kind of becomes this traditional thing, and it kind of stands out to the English as well, because the English sort of become anti anything that's like traditionally Irish, and anything that's not. If the Irish are not dressing traditionally English, and this happens in Scotland as well, going into the Jacobite Williamite Wars, the English kind of have a fate and start putting on all these stupid laws that make absolutely no sense. All over the place, for them to dress more like English people, which is considered the civilized people, which is, oh my God, just completely wild. But regardless, because there's a fashion wave that comes from, it's Iberian Peninsula, isn't it? That fashion wave of saffron tunics comes from Iberia, in my interpretation, isn't it?
Yeah. So exactly, those big sleeves that you see on the Lena, that's a 16th century innovation that comes to I've hypothesized comes from Spain.
Yeah,
because it's the Spanish. the Spanish are the ones who start the big chemise sleeve thing in general. They're the first ones to do it across Europe. And by the end of the 15th century, Spain has asserted itself as one of the richest, the richest kingdom, right? Thanks to its New World plundering, and so they're the ones who are starting to set the fashions. And so of course it makes sense that the Irish, being Irish, are like, yeah, hell, we want in on this action. Give us big sleeves. We want big sleeves, and let's dye it yellow because that will be super cool. And also, saffron is expensive, so what better way to show that you're rich Irish than dyeing your 20 yards of lena, this very expensive dye stuff that doesn't grow in Ireland.
Yeah, and that's basically what happens. This gets very, very popular in Ireland. And because you also have the Tudor conquest of Ireland at the time, because the Tudors are invading, they're just like, we hate this. You should be all dressing like us fine, civilized English people. So they banned the lena.
And yet, I told you that Henry VII in his inventory, it lists that he received it as a gift. It lists an Irish smock. Literally, it calls it an Irish smocka, and it's got to be a lena. So that even in the 1490s, there's got to be something that's distinguishing. By then, at any rate, there is something that's distinguishing the Irish smock from the English smock. It doesn't say what, and I'm not going to jump up and say, oh, it absolutely must be saffron. I don't like to overinterpret the sources, you know me. But that entry clearly tells us that yes, the smock and the lena there's synonyms. It's the layer that goes against your skin. And as the 16th century wears on across Europe, that layer that goes against your skin gets fancier and fancier and more expensive everywhere. Everywhere. The Irish decide that they're going to dye it in saffron, which is crazy expensive. Everyone else is like, well, we're going to cover ours in blackwork silk embroidery so that if you do try to wash it, it's going to get ruined and then you have to get a new one.
Thank God I'm Irish.
Question from James. Did their garments take hygiene into consideration? If you're talking about women, yes. Men wore breeches, and I'm of the opinion that many women also wore linen breeches, especially at certain times of the month. If you're interested in medieval women's underwear, I have my most controversial video, second most controversial video. First one is medieval hats. My second most controversial video is medieval women's underwear. If you go to my channel and look up underpants or underwear under the long format videos, you can see my entire presentation on the topic, the evidence for and against women having worn underwear. But depending on where you were in Europe and when you were in medieval Europe, women have had at times definitely worn underpants. And they definitely had ways to handle the monthly flow. No, they did not just bleed freely into their clothes. That's bullshit. Anyone who thinks that hasn't tried it for real.
I was about to remove that new comment that popped up there, but it's actually already moved from the YouTube. So that person definitely got blocked and banned. But I think that's definitely a robot.
It's got to be, right?
Yeah. No one in the comment section can see what we can see, but there's, like a really, really super vulgar comment just popped up in our little thing. But I think the YouTube algorithm picked it up. Jesus, like what a comment, like.
Oh, okay. So James, you've got some good misconceptions we can bust here. The garments did not get sweaty. Natural fibers allow you to breathe. And linen breathes really well. That's why people wear linen in tropical places like Egypt. Linen breathes really well and it whisks the moisture away from your skin. Linen also has antimicrobial properties as part of the natural properties of linen, and medieval people laundered their undergarments weekly, all the time, heavily laundered. They laundered their undergarments, so no one was getting bed sores and thrush in the Middle Ages. They were also very clean. Philip in Ireland too, right? They bathed they washed their bodies anyway on a regular basis.
Yeah, sure. The Finn cycle talks about bats in Ireland and stuff, and women batting men in both the Finn cycle and in the Ulster cycle as well. It talks about women batting men.
Yeah, exactly. But even that's at the noble level. Even at any level, all you need is a basin and a rag. Basin of water, a bowl of water, not even a big bowl of water and a rag. And you take the rag and you dip it in the water, and then you've Wash your body off. You don't need to submerge your body in a tub of water to get clean, people. Goodness. And the linen, you don't just wear this until it's fetid and nasty. You wash it. You have laundress, you have professional laundresses who do this work, and everyone could use them. And if you were too poor, then you've probably got other issues than whether you smell bad or your hygiene is bad. If you can't afford a laundress, you're probably in a pretty rough shape, actually. Yeah.
When it comes down to that question there by heart, myself and Dr. Owen O'Neill and Mihal will be talking about all that kind of stuff on your Wednesday night. So if you're living in America and in Europe, Wednesday night, myself, Owen O'Neill and Mihal will be covering from paganism to Christianity in Ireland. So we will be going into that deep dive because it's not a simple answer in there. We want to
really
get
not.
proper deep into it. And have that deep conversation about what evil St. Patrick did, huh?
Oh my God, that man.
Especially in his letters, like how dare he apologize, huh?
Well, he was licking nipples. I mean, come on, you've got to be evil if you're licking nipples.
Well, actually, that was the pagans, but
Well, no, but wasn't he forced to do it? Oh no, right, and then he got out of it because he's Christian. Right.
The boat driver was like, no, you're grand because you're actually a Christian. That means you don't have to do it. So he got out of it because he was a Christian.
Right.
So them nipple lickers, huh? No wonder Patrick wants to get rid of all of them.
So another great comment, James mentions the Victorian slums seem so backwards now. Yes. Remember, the Industrial Revolution wrecks Europe and America. Wherever it goes, it creates filth and disease and horrible living and working conditions for people. The Middle Ages is not Victorian England. The cities were cleaner, they didn't smell as bad, and the diseases that were rampant was actually the Black Plague, which has nothing to do with hygiene. So what the kinds of conditions that people suffered from in Victorian times or in the Industrial Revolution doesn't apply to the Middle Ages. They don't even have cholera in the Middle Ages. So early 20th century is absolutely so poverty stricken. And medieval society was the divide between rich and poor was certainly less in most of the Middle Ages through most of Europe. Philip, of course, your mileage is going to vary, right? There are more places that are more equitable than others and times that are more equitable than others. But I think people need to make sure that they don't look at the way people lived. I did? Did I? Am I back? Can you hear me? Hello? I'm going to assume that people can still hear me.
Sorry about that.
Oh, okay. No, I think I'm fine from my side. Anyway, so
it's my side.
I think you need better internet, buddy. You've mostly looked like a drunk Monet painting for most of this live stream, so you need definitely maybe.
What's wrong with the internet and restream? To be honest with you.
Oh God. Okay, so if you want.
With the other last week as well.
Right. They definitely had brown people in the Middle Ages and in Europe. If you'd like to see that, Philip and I did a wonderful presentation on this. And it's the recording is on my YouTube channel. If you look up Africans and Europe, you will find it. We talked about brown people too. So yeah. Any other questions we've missed, Philip? Let's see. What do we have here? Many Americans think that the pagans were driven out of Ireland by St. Patrick. Is that what the Irish people also think? There's a good question for you, Philip.
I covered with Dr. Owen O'Neill, and I'll cover that. Was it Neil, Mihal, and myself are covering Wednesday night. Wednesday night, we're going to be covering that American and in Ireland. And then if you happen to live in Australia and all that whole area, we'll be covering it on Thursday morning because, the world is round. So different times at different places. So if you're living in America and you're living in Europe, it will be Wednesday night. and we will be covering from paganism to Christianity in medieval Ireland, early medieval Ireland, and we'll be covering everything to do with the Irish and their interpretations then. So definitely head over to my channel and subscribe to that if you're interested in all that kind of stuff.
But I mean, I think though the short answer is that St. Patrick did not drive the pagans out of Ireland. Like, you imagine that, like, you know, he just drove them all to the edge of the cliff and they fell into the ocean or something. Like, did
No, like Ireland was still mostly pagan by the time St. Patrick had passed away. He kind of like he was just famous kind of at this point for writing letters, because if they at that point they were looking to bring in bishops into Ireland, which means that St. Patrick wasn't even the first Christian in Ireland. If they're trying to bring Bishop Palladius and all these characters into Ireland, that means there were already Christian settlers in Ireland at the time. On top of that as well, it's our interpretation, we're assuming he brought Roman Christianity into Ireland, when in fact Ireland kind of goes into its own interpretation of what is Christianity, which kind of goes into a much more complicated story. So the thing is, did St. Patrick drive all the pagans out of Ireland? No, by the time St. Patrick has passed away, like, paganism is still the dominant religion in Ireland at the time. So I don't know where this genocide comes from, especially since the Aenale themselves, who actually liked St. Patrick being in their great hall and entertained him all the time and gave him protection, which was the main kingship of Ireland at the time, they themselves did not convert to Christianity until 550, and then bang, 550 comes in and they convert to Christianity with Kerbal. What's his name? It is Kerbal. Anyway, it doesn't matter. It'll come back to me on Wednesday. But anyway, Kerbal is the first person that actually converts to Christianity, and we still have pagan druids in the country, in the island, and we still have pagans on the island. Like, they write about pagans all the way up to the coming of the Vikings, and then obviously the Vikings are also pagan as well. So it's not like pagans just popped and disappeared. We have pagans all the way up to the 11th century. And then what's the funniest thing of all is the most radical pagans suddenly become the most radical Christians in the 11th century with the Reform. Yeah, and they just were, Saint Olaf becomes their saint. You know, so
converts are always the most zealous, actually. So the question is, will this Wednesday video on Philip's channel be available to watch after the fact? Yes, all of these videos get posted as recordings almost immediately after the live stream. So even if you can't catch any of our streams live, everyone, they will absolutely be posted as recordings unless something goes hideously wrong with the live stream. Yeah, but definitely. So I just like to remind everyone, even if you haven't subscribed because you had to comment, to like and subscribe. And if you're in my community, the Creative Contessa community, please go to Philip's Irish Medieval History channel and subscribe there. And if you are on Philip's Irish Medieval History channel and you'd like to know about what's happening in other parts of Europe during the Middle Ages, then come check out my channel. I focus on medieval material culture and not just 15th century. So come and check us out. Okay, any other questions that we have?
She's other than the one about freaking what happened in 1961. That's a mess and a half.
I think maybe this isn't the venue for that. What do you think, Philip?
Yeah, 100%. Here, I cover medieval history, or that's one of the reasons why. What's his name? If you're into that kind of stuff, Finn Dwyer touches off topics like that every once in a while, and he does medieval history as well. In fact, he's one of the few people that can actually go from medieval history into modern history with absolutely no problems. So I definitely, his channel is called Irish History, and it's on Spotify, is where he puts up most of his stuff. He's also on, YouTube as well, where he does the Irish History podcast. So definitely, if you're into that kind of stuff, pop over to Finn Dwyer. He mostly covers those sort of topics, but no, I do not cover that, and for good reason.
Mathieu has an interesting comment about the etymology. He says it's weird because pagan is translated into French into païen, but we also say paganisme for paganism. Yeah, it's the origins of the word pagan are of course also interesting. It literally means the people out in the country, originally. Like,
so is the case of its play on words of peasant as well?
Yeah, it's kind of, yeah, it all kind of ties into that. And the idea is that the people out in the country have these weird religious
Oh,
practices, right? So
yeah, which they do, in
yeah,
fairness.
so that's where that comes from. And of course, now it has a very specific connotation that it originally didn't really have. So yeah.
Okay, I have to take note of that one. Actually, look into that one because that's very interesting. Because we see a lot of that happening in Ireland even today. So that's
Yeah.
interesting.
Okay. Well, Philip, I think is that it for us then?
Yeah, that's pretty much my side of it. So yeah, stay tuned for Wednesday night where we talk about from paganism and Christianity. But other than that, guys,
Yeah,
thanks
we'll
very
be back
much.
on same bat time, same bat channel with the Medieval Buzz. So if you enjoyed this format, join us again next week, Monday night, Monday afternoon, evening Americas, middle of the night Europe, Tuesday morning Asia. Otherwise, everyone, until next time, we thank you for all of your support, everyone. And until then, may your learning be creative. Bye, everyone.
So, slán go, Alia.